Chapter 1404. She held her breath, but there was a fiery thing in her heart that kept jumping here and there, leaping here and there. We've known each other for more than 10 years, and we've spent the most important moments of our lives together. We've saved each other's lives in the most difficult times, and we've left sweat on each other's bodies time and time again. We've hugged, kissed, and loved each other deeply. We've never given up on each other. If it weren't for the doctor's advice to pay attention to his health, how could she not want to go further? The person she loved was right in front of her. She was not a teenage girl who didn't understand the world. Fong Ling took out the washed dishes and tidied them up. When she went out, she saw that Li Nanheng seemed to have calmed down and seemed to be used to being rejected by her. He didn't say anything but just sat there waiting for her, like a child who didn't get candy but had no choice but to stand there and wait. The next morning, the doctor arrived. After checking all aspects, the doctor kept nodding. Not bad. Every time you come for a rehabilitation checkup, there are new breakthroughs. Mr. Li's physical fitness is really not comparable to that of ordinary people. He's too strong. As long as his eyes are not affected, even if a few people come to fight with him, they may not be able to defeat him. Really? Some people even say that I can't beat him. Li Nanheng sat by the table, casually buttoned his cuffs, and then fastened his collar. He said these words to Fong Ling indifferently. The doctor sat down and chatted with Li Nanheng for a while. He didn't see Fong Ling again for a long time. When he turned back, he noticed that she had come back with something and asked, "What are you doing?" "Moving. The apartment above is his." "I'm moving down some things that can be used," Fong Ling replied and continued to go out. In fact, there weren't many things, but she had to sort them out. She went to the cabinet and took out all the things that occupied the space and arranged them one by one. When she finished all the examinations for Li Nanheng and told him how to recuperate and consolidate his health in the next few months, she got up and saw that Fong Ling took out 2 golden boxes from the cabinet and piled them against the wall, waiting to put them in another place. The doctor's sharp eyes caught a glimpse of the contents of the box. He walked over and looked at it carefully. At this moment, Fong Ling stood up from her squatting position. When she turned back, she met the doctor's eyes. She paused, lowered her head, and instantly saw the 2 boxes of supplements. Before she had time to be embarrassed, the doctor coughed and then turned to change the medicine for Li Nanheng's eyes as if nothing had happened. At this moment, Fong Ling also remembered that she had to be embarrassed. She quickly put away the 2 boxes. Just now, she was in a hurry to tidy up the cabinet and didn't notice that she had taken these things out. After a while, the doctor came over to pour himself a glass of water. As he poured the water, he looked at Fong Ling, who was about to come over to receive a glass of water. He did not walk away. Even when he saw Fong Ling receiving the water, he still stood by the side with an expression as though nothing had happened. His voice was so low that only she could hear it. "Actually, based on Mr. Li's physical condition, it's no longer a big deal. I just keep reminding you to be careful." Fong Ling turned to look at him. Seeing that she didn't seem to understand what he meant, the doctor coughed in a low voice. "I mean, as long as you pay attention to one thing and don't let Mr. Li be too tired, it's okay for the 2 of you to do something, but you have to pay attention to moderation. You have to pay attention to moderation." After hearing this, Fong Ling withdrew her gaze and silently closed the small door of the water dispenser as though she hadn't heard anything. Then she calmly took a sip of water and turned to leave without saying a word. In the afternoon, Li Nanheng didn't know what was wrong with Fong Ling. Although she usually didn't speak much, she was especially quiet this afternoon. For example, he asked, "Where did I put the slippers just now? Did you put them away?" Fong Ling didn't answer. She took the slippers over, placed them by his feet, and then ran away as though the soles of her feet were smeared with oil. "For example," he said, "my eyes are a little itchy today. Can you take off the medicine in advance? I feel the most comfortable when I don't apply medicine." Fong Ling didn't say anything. She adjusted the small hairdryer to the most soothing and cool mode and gently blew around his eyes for a while. When he didn't feel so itchy anymore, she slipped away again. In the evening, when Li Nanheng was eating, he felt that the taste was a little strange. Is there something on your mind today? Usually, Feng Ling's cooking was moderate and rarely tasted wrong. Although today's food was not bad and the taste was not much different, it was indeed a little salter than usual, which meant that she was thinking about something when she added the salt. Feng Ling glanced at him silently. Was this man's sensitivity so high? When she was preparing dinner, the iPad screen next to her didn't display a menu today, but some related topics about how to make a man feel more comfortable at that time, and various similar topics. She looked them up, and at this moment, her mind was filled with the actions she had prepared hundreds of times in her mind to do to him. She just didn't know how to do the first step. The sky turned dark. Li Nanheng went to take a shower and change his clothes. In the past month, his hair had grown a lot, and his ink-black hair was still dripping with water. He casually shook his hair. Because he had taken off the medicine in front of his eyes before taking a shower, he felt that his eyes were relaxed and comfortable. He simply sat on the sofa with his eyes closed and casually pulled the blanket over, planning to sit on the sofa and take a nap. After all, it was not time to sleep yet, and he still needed to apply ice before going to bed at night. Just as Li Nanheng was about to fall asleep, he suddenly heard footsteps approaching. He knew it was Feng Ling who had just come out of the shower. She was not wearing shoes and was barefoot. He frowned and woke up. I was wondering why you weren't wearing. Before he could finish speaking, he was suddenly shocked by Feng Ling's movement. At this moment, his nose smelled the fragrance of shower gel and shampoo. Then, a woman wearing only a loose t-shirt on her upper body and nothing on her lower body, not even wearing underwear, spread her slender legs and directly sat on his lap. Qingqing's baby has 4 days off. Qingqing accompanied the child to play outside for 4 days. It's true that holidays are more tiring than working days. I'm so tired that I'm about to collapse. After tomorrow night's update, see you on Weibo. By the way, I'll shout myself hoarse and beg for monthly votes here. It's rare to get double monthly votes. Chapter 1405. Only a fool would let go of the person in his arms who had suddenly taken the initiative to deliver herself to him. Even though Li Nanheng's mind was a little dazed, he subconsciously quickly put his legs down to prevent her from falling down again. Feeling that the man's reaction was to let her sit more steadily, Feng Ling looked at the man's face and was silent for a while. She was too embarrassed to say the words that were about to come out of her mouth. However, just as Li Nanheng was about to ask her what she was doing, Feng Ling had already held his hand that he had just raised to hold her. Sitting on his lap, she lowered her head and gently kissed his warm and dry palm. This kiss went from the palm to the tip of his finger, and then to the tip of his finger. Then Li Nanheng felt that she seemed to pause for a moment. After hesitating for a second, she still gently bit the tip of his finger. Feng Ling's teeth were white and neat, but in fact, there were 2 unruly little canine teeth hidden. At this moment, she was gently biting him with her little canine teeth and even accidentally rubbed her tongue. It was soft. The feeling was transmitted from his fingers to the sensitive nerve endings. Li Nanheng's body trembled reflexively and he was about to pull his hand away, but she grabbed his hand and did not let go. She bit his fingertips harder and when she let go, the teeth marks on his fingertips were clearly visible. Feng, you. Before Li Nanheng could speak, his lips were suddenly sealed by her soft lips. On his thigh, the woman was inextricably pressed against him. Although the two of them were sitting on the sofa, their lower bodies were intertwined in an intimate and dangerous position. Separated by a thin material, Li Nanheng could not hide this situation in less than 2 seconds. Feng Ling seemed to be not used to this position. She tried her best to retract her legs, which made him feel even more stimulated. Li Nanheng, yesterday was my birthday. You didn't give me a present. Feng Ling pressed against him tightly and kissed him until he was stunned. After he could not speak, she leaned close to his ear and whispered. Li Nanheng's brows trembled. Yesterday, those 4 old men came to make a scene. Later, I wanted to take them out for a walk, but every time after eating, I didn't have the appetite to eat cakes and other desserts. At night, when I wanted to go out, they said that it was too windy and I couldn't go out, so it's okay. If you didn't remind me, I wouldn't have remembered it was yesterday. One more day won't make a difference. Then what do you want? Under Fong Ling's gaze, even though Li Nanheng couldn't see how red her face was at this moment and how much tension and uneasiness were hidden under the calm surface in her eyes, he could guess that this was the first time she had taken the initiative to do such a thing. Although she looked like a wolf and a tiger, she must be panicking inside, so he didn't deliberately provoke her. He only asked softly and calmly, in case he said something wrong and scared away this little Fong Ling who had jumped into the dragon's pool and tiger's den. After all, he couldn't see right now. If she really ran away, he might not be able to catch her. Fong Ling felt inexplicably calmer under Li Nanheng's calm gaze. Then give me a gift today. Li Nanheng was still extremely calm. What gift? Fong Ling did not speak at first but lowered her head to look at his Adam's apple. She remembered that she had bitten here in the warm pool in the resort. Later, for some reason, she kept wanting to bite him. That time, when she bit his Adam's apple, this man seemed to have groaned a few times. It was clearly a sensitive place for him. She leaned down and suddenly bit his neck, then gently bit his Adam's apple. Sure enough, the man who was pressed against the sofa by her stiffened all over. In less than a second, his muscles tightened, and the hand that had just held her waist tightened. Fong Ling turned her head slightly and pressed against his neck, which was gradually heating up. I don't know how to make it comfortable, but before she could finish speaking, Li Nanheng pressed her firmly into his arms. Fong Ling's lips hit his neck, and then the man suddenly carried her up. He bent down to lift her up and carried her horizontally. He took a few steps toward the bedroom and did not stop for a moment. He entered the bedroom and kicked the door shut. Then he placed Fong Ling on the bed, pushed her into the soft blanket, and firmly covered her. With Li Nanheng's figure and height, he had long recovered to a certain extent. She had always treated him as a weak patient who could not even kill a chicken to take care of him for so long. It was probably because she had been taking care of him for so long that she subconsciously felt that Li Nanheng was weaker than her. However, on the contrary, this man had never been weaker than her. For example, right now, she could completely feel the strength in the man's arms and the man's firm and hard chest imprisoning her. She knew that she had barged into his territory tonight. Right now, even if she wanted to stop, it was impossible. It was also because she had already made preparations in advance. The man locked her on the bed, and his hot breath brushed against her neck. She was forced to stare at the man's black eyes in this face-to-face position. In the bedroom without the lights on, the man's eyes were very bright. They were so bright that it was as though he could see the fine sweat on her nose due to her nervousness. It was as though he could see the softness in her eyes. Why do you suddenly want to do it again? Didn't you desperately escape from me yesterday and warn me again and again to restrain yourself? Fong Ling's lips moved and then she pursed them. Even though he couldn't see her, she still subconsciously tilted her head away. The doctor said that it's okay, but I can't let you be too tired, and then I still have to restrain myself. I can't be too long, can't be too long. Li Nanheng seemed to be amused. All right, under normal circumstances, after holding it in for so long, I might not be able to do it until dawn. Seeing that the doctor has relented, let's end it before dawn. Fong Ling. Li Nanheng, pay attention to your body. What's wrong with my body? As the man spoke, he pushed against her as nastily as before. I haven't touched you for a long time. I've been weak in front of you for a few months, and you really think I'm a little gigolo? If I don't make you cry tonight, I'm afraid the name Li Nanheng will be written backwards. Fong Ling's face heated up. In the end, she forced herself to say something, but when the words reached her mouth, the man pushed against her again and she couldn't say anything. Speak. Li Nanheng slowly bent down and leaned closer. When he spoke, his lips were almost pressed against hers. Who gave you the guts to come out and seduce me without wearing anything down there? Chapter 1406. Speak. Li Nanheng slowly leaned down and leaned closer. When he spoke, his lips were almost pressed against hers. Who gave you the guts to come out and tease me without wearing anything? Feng Ling originally wanted to answer that she had checked the various suggestions of people online and said that men like this kind of thing. That was why she had saved the lower half of her body after showering. But before he could open his mouth, his voice was suddenly sealed. The man's kiss was different from every previous kiss. In the terrifying and suffocating entanglement, accompanied by the man's long-suppressed desire, all of her senses were infused with such a fiery kiss. Her body could not help but gradually heat up. Don't move. Let me do it. She remembered that she had to take the initiative. She raised her hand and was about to unbutton his clothes when the man spoke urgently and vaguely. At the same time, he held her hand and quickly unbuttoned his home clothes one by one. Then he pulled her hand up and pressed it against his chest. Due to the heavy blow in Israel, his originally flat muscles and skin had many uneven marks. Because it had only healed a few months ago, it was not the best time to have a scar removal operation. These scars would need at least 2 to 3 years to be removed. Touching the scars, Feng Ling's heart ached. She took the initiative to circle behind him and hugged his back tightly. Sensing her actions, the man panted and asked with a smile, "Are these scars very sexy?" Touching them here and there. It was not just sexy. When she thought about how this man had managed to survive in such a dangerous situation, and how he was able to stand in front of her and press her down on the bed with his strong muscles, she felt extremely sexy. She did not speak. She raised her head and kissed his chin, then kissed his lips. All the active responses caused the man's restraint to collapse to the limit. He abruptly pressed her under his body and pressed his forehead against hers. He said hoarsely, "How dare you tease me like this? When you cry, pay attention to your throat. Don't shout until it's hoarse. Do you love me?" Answer. She couldn't recover from the surging tide of passion. She could only rely on her instincts to answer a vague word hoarsely. Love. Li Nanheng's first reaction was to not believe his ears. A few seconds later, joy came like a storm. He suddenly carried her up and went straight to the bathroom. Feng Ling was carried on his shoulder. Earlier, her soul was almost scattered. She barely took a breath and said, "Slow down, Li Nanheng, slow down. There's a sofa in front. I can't see it. Don't bump into it." However, the man was already familiar with all the distances and positions in this house. He accurately circled around the sofa and entered the bathroom door. When she was pressed against the bathroom wall by the man, Feng Ling could only hear the man repeating under the warm shower, "I love you, Feng Ling, I love you." Time passed bit by bit. Before Feng Ling's consciousness dissipated, the only thing she could think of was that she was glad that she didn't give him the nutritious food the Li family sent. Otherwise, her life would have been lost here. How was he injured? It was clearly just a few scars on his body. Anything else? He was completely unaffected. In the early morning, the sun slowly rose from the east and cast a bright light through the gaps in the curtains. On the large bed in the bedroom, the clothes and bedding were messily folded. Finally, the man's heavy breathing and the woman's weak cat-like moans gradually calmed down. Li Nanheng was still on top of her. He took a shower midway and then continued several times. He was reluctant to lie down, as if being close to her like this was enough for him to fall asleep comfortably. Feng Ling half opened her eyes tiredly and frowned. "What's wrong?" Li Nanheng asked softly. Feng Ling did not answer. Using the light in the room, she sized up the man on top of her bit by bit. When Li Nanheng's eyes were not so cold and sharp, he looked very calm and handsome. When his facial features were soft, he was so good-looking that it made people want to lean against him. However, he often had a cold, "don't provoke me" attitude and expression, so his brows were always cold and sharp, making people not dare to approach him. Especially when he was very good at looking at Li Nanheng's brows and straight nose. She looked carefully and seriously. After a long time, she raised her hand and touched Li Nanheng's face. I thought it was about time for dawn to come and I should sleep for a while. The man lowered his head and bit her lips, saying harshly, but it's clear that you don't want to sleep. Li Nanheng was like a lion that had been hungry for a long time and finally had meat again. This night, from the initial intensity, gradually changed from surging desire to true love. You can't take it anymore? Didn't you say that I'm so weak that I can't even beat you? Am I so delicate? Feng Ling subconsciously wanted to grab the bedsheets as though she wanted to break free, but the moment she moved, the man pressed her back down with his hands on her waist and kissed her heavily. The noon sun shone through the gap in the curtains and onto the messy large bed in the bedroom. Feng Ling's eyelashes fluttered, and she slowly opened her eyes. After a few seconds of confusion, her eyes finally focused. She felt a heavy object on her body. She lowered her head and saw that it was indeed that familiar arm. She wanted to turn over, but the sleeping man pulled her into his arms again. Li Nanheng's upper body was naked outside the quilt. He closed his eyes and held her head with one hand and her waist with the other. Sleep for a while more. Feng Ling was caught off guard and bumped into the man's chest. Her entire face was facing him. She quickly struggled and said, "It's almost noon. You haven't eaten yet. You haven't applied medicine to your eyes. You forgot to ice them last night." She had just struggled to get off the bed, but before her feet touched the ground, the man suddenly hugged her from behind and she fell back onto the large bed. Then Li Nanheng pulled her into his arms and hugged her tightly again. "It's all right. Sleep first. These few hours won't matter. But, be good." The man stroked her head comfortingly. Clearly, although he had a good night, he was indeed sleepy. After all, he had been recuperating for so long and was used to sleeping early and waking up early. He suddenly didn't sleep for the whole night. Right now, he really needed to hug her to make up for his sleep. "Aren't you going to eat?" Chapter 1407. I'm not hungry. Let's sleep first. We'll talk when we wake up. He insisted on holding her in his arms. Feng Ling's head was tilted back by this man, and her entire body was firmly in his arms. She did not have much strength. After being squeezed for an entire night, it would be strange if she had any strength. Seeing that he insisted, she simply let herself be in his arms and closed her eyes again. But why was this man pressing against her as if he was threatening her? She carefully avoided him, but he rubbed against her again, insisting on sticking to her. In the end, she was afraid that something would happen again, so she simply stopped moving and chose to sleep. Seeing that she was not moving, the man kissed the white skin on the back of her neck as if he was a little regretful. He wanted to say that he still wanted to continue, but seeing that her body was so weak, he couldn't bear to say that. There was still a long way to go. Since she had already agreed to marry him, there was no hurry. They could continue at night. Li Nanheng hugged her tighter in his arms, brushed aside her long hair by her ear, kissed her white ear, and said softly, "Sweet dreams." Feng Ling rubbed her face against his arm, but there was no reaction. Clearly, she was about to fall asleep. Li Nanheng called a nearby hotel to send food over. After receiving the food, he went to the dining table and placed it on the table one by one. Then he tested the temperature with his hand, scooped some pork rib soup, and brought it into the bedroom. The light in the room was not turned on. Right now, it did not matter to him whether the light was on or not. He walked back to the bed and could still smell some hormones in the bedroom, which stimulated Li Nanheng's sensitive nerve endings after sleeping with her in his arms for a few hours. Hearing the sound, Feng Ling seemed to have regained some consciousness. She curled up under the quilt and half closed her eyes, looking unwilling to wake up. It was not until Li Nanheng's hand took her out of the quilt and kept kissing her, from her hair to the corner of her eyes, and patted her face to tell her to get up and eat something that she suddenly woke up. He couldn't see. How could he get food for her? However, when she turned her eyes, she saw that it was a takeaway box from a nearby 5-star hotel. She paused, opened her mouth, and said in a hoarse voice, "You brought it in just like that? What if it's scalded? What's hot?" "No matter how hot it is, you have to let him eat something first. That's what you call physical exhaustion." Li Nanheng put down the bowl and touched her cheek. "Eat something before you sleep, or your stomach will be uncomfortable." Feng Ling really didn't have much strength, but seeing that he had specially asked for food from the hotel, he was afraid that she would be hungry. No matter how tired she was, she couldn't bear to push him away. She took the bowl and spoon, ate a few mouthfuls, and drank some soup. Then she put the bowl aside. "Leave it here. Don't walk around." She was so sleepy that she even forgot to help him apply the medicine. She lay down and was about to sleep. The man chuckled and bent down to kiss her lips, which still had the taste of pork rib soup. "All right, I won't wander around. I'll accompany you in bed." Feng Ling thought he meant to sleep with her, so she answered vaguely and went back to sleep. Who knew that the man would directly take off his clothes and lie back under the blanket? Behind him, easily, Feng Ling really couldn't take it anymore. Amidst the ups and downs of the quilt, she spoke hoarsely. Boss," the man's low and hoarse voice was close to her ear. Feng Ling closed her eyes and wanted to say something, but because of the man's hoarse voice in her ear, she couldn't say anything. "Be good. I promise this will be the last time today." Before her consciousness completely dissipated, this was another promise from Li Nanheng, the liar. When Feng Ling opened her eyes again, it was already dusk outside. She flipped over from under the blanket and sat up. Because she hadn't done it for a long time, the pain there caused her to suck in a breath of cold air when she stood up. After a long while, she finally slowed down and walked out. Her body had actually been washed. At the very least, Li Nanheng was very careful about this. He wouldn't let her sleep uncomfortably with her body sticky all over. Li Nanheng wasn't in the bedroom. She opened the door and walked out, only to see the man sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on his head, making his entire body glow. Hearing the sound of the bedroom door, the man turned his head slightly. Hearing the sound, Feng Ling looked at him for a moment and walked over. She was about to reach out to help him back to the sofa, but when she raised her hand, her expression froze. On her ring finger, there was a platinum ring. When she got up earlier, she didn't notice it. Now that she saw this ring, she was stunned for a few seconds and asked, "This ring?" "When the old man came over yesterday, he secretly stuffed it into my hand when he was in the kitchen." Speaking up to here, Li Nanheng sighed with a smile. "He also didn't let me tell the other 3 old men." Feng Ling looked at the ring on her ring finger and felt that this ring was very old. It should be a very expensive and popular platinum ring from many years or even decades ago. Although it was a little old, she must have hired a craftsman to polish the surface of the ring until it was as smooth as new. It was clean, bright, and very beautiful. "So this ring is the Li family's heirloom?" Feng Ling asked teasingly. "No, it said that my grandfather and grandmother wore it when they got married. After the old lady passed away, no one noticed when the old man took off her ring and kept it by his side for so many years," Li Nanheng said mildly. "After the old lady left, this ring was equivalent to the old man's life. Now that he asked me to hand this ring to you, I don't think he has any intention of completely binding me to the Li family. He is just apologizing to you and expressing the Li family's sincerity." "Apologize for what?" After Feng Ling finished speaking, she suddenly recalled how she was chased out of the base. She paused. After thinking for a moment, she said, "I understand." With that, she leaned over and endured the pain in her lower body. She looked at the man sitting on the carpet by the window and reached out to show 2 in front of him. "Li Nanheng, how many is this?" The man searched for her voice and fixed his eyes in her direction. "What?" "I said, how many is this?" "My hand, in front of you." Feng Ling turned her fingers into 3. "Li Nanheng, you still can't see it?" Nonsense. Then how did you carry me to take a shower, call the hotel for takeout, and even put the ring on my finger? Today's roller coaster ride, I'm sure everyone knows where to look, right? I'm frantically hinting that if it's not in the main account, everyone can directly go to the sub-account. In any case, there will definitely be one. Chingxing is really working hard to satisfy everyone, and then I'll ask for monthly votes. Chapter 1408. The air fell into a moment of silence. Feng Ling looked at him. Li Nanheng, if you dare to lie to me after your eyes have recovered, you know my temper. It's not healed, really. Li Nanheng raised his face, his expression calm and serious. She paused, not believing him. She stared at him for a long while, then leaned over to his eyes. She stared straight into his eyes and raised her hand to touch his eyes. However, the man raised his hand and pulled her into his arms. The moment she stumbled into his arms, she immediately cried out, "You still say you can't see?" "I really can't see." The man didn't let go after hugging her. He sat on the carpet and hugged her into a ball. He lowered his head and kissed her on the cheek. "Occasionally, I can see some blurry images with the help of the light. It's so blurry that I can't see it clearly. For example, right now, there's a lot of light in the window. I can see a figure standing in the dark, but when you raise your hand, I can't see it clearly." "Then how did you get the hotel takeout?" "The number you recently dialed is K. I touched my phone, dialed the nearest number, and asked K to help me contact a nearby hotel. So that's how it is." The man lowered his head and kissed her forehead comfortingly. "You want me to recover my eyesight as soon as possible and marry me? Why are you in such a hurry to marry me?" Feng Ling did not speak, but Li Nanheng rarely gave others pressure. He could act as usual as though there was nothing wrong with his eyes, so in the past few months, she often forgot that he could not see anything. It wasn't easy for her to catch some clues that her eyes could see, but in the end, it was not. That's right. He had been groping around this house for several months. It was not difficult to carry her to the bathroom, and he could even find her ring finger. "Since you can see some blurry images, it means that your eyes have improved. Find time to go to the hospital again. The doctors who occasionally come for a health check can't bring equipment. Go to the hospital for another check." "All right." Li Nanheng heard the restraint in her tone and raised his hand to touch her head. He was the one who should be comforted, but now he had to comfort her instead. Coincidentally, Feng Ling's legs were still sore, so she simply let herself lean in his arms and did not get up. The evening sun was also warm. She narrowed her eyes and leaned in his arms for a while before feeling sleepy again. In the end, he accidentally fell asleep again. When she woke up again, Feng Ling was in the bedroom. Hearing Li Nanheng's voice in the living room, she got up and walked out to see that he was answering the phone. "Yes, Dr. Yorko contacted me a month ago. Some time ago, he was accompanying a seriously ill elder in the sanatorium and has been on leave. Recently, he returned to New York and had a few important eye tissue surgeries. He just took the time to arrange a week of free time. I'll go over and give it a try. You don't have to come over. You're only here to visit at a time like this. My wife still has to prepare food for you. It's enough for her to take care of me." Feng Ling listened for a while and walked over. Coincidentally, Li Nanheng had hung up the phone. "Awake?" he asked, turning to her at the sound of her footsteps. "Who called?" "Qin Sighting." Li Nanheng handed her a cup of milk that he had just warmed. When Feng Ling gratefully received it, he said, "Qin Sighting knows an internationally renowned ophthalmologist, but it's very difficult to make an appointment with this doctor. Because an elder in his family passed away not long ago, he hasn't been out for a consultation. He only recently resumed work. Mo Jingshan recently contacted the president of their hospital and specially gave me Dr. Yurko's time for the next week. Is this doctor very good at treating eyes? It shouldn't be bad. A month ago, I accepted the suggestion of a doctor in Los Angeles and contacted this famous Dr. Yurko. However, at that time, something had just happened to his family and he really didn't have time to come, so I didn't force him. Li Nanheng heard the soft sound of her drinking milk and smiled. Recently, Enchanting and Mo Jingshan have used their connections to make a decision. We'll leave for New York tomorrow. I'll go meet Dr. Yurko, and you can go back to New York to visit the Feng family. Yesterday, Jean Wan said on the phone that she was coming. I didn't want her to go abroad with the child. She's pregnant recently, so I didn't let her come. What you said today, if she finds out, she might really think that I don't want to entertain them personally. Feng Ling drank most of the milk and glanced at him. I think you don't want to see Mr. Mo and Mrs. Mo bring their 2 children to show off their love in front of you. Li Nanheng sneered but did not explain. Instead, he turned his head and kissed her ear. When she was about to dodge to the side, he held her waist and pressed her into the sofa. Then hurry up and give birth to 1 or 2 for me. If Mo Jingshan dares to show off in front of me with his wife and children, I'll throw our children's diapers on his face. Let's see if he still dares to show off. Feng Ling, she imagined the scene and then thought of Mr. Mo's expressionless face. A chill ran down her spine and she quickly pushed him away. It's not easy for Mr. Mo and Jean Wan to have such a peaceful little happiness. Is there a need for you to be so sour? Besides, Dr. Qin isn't married and has no children. It's not like you're the last one. What's the rush? Li Nanheng sneered on the spot. Then I'm afraid you don't know that when Shi Nianj ruthlessly slept with him and left him for America, she already had the Qin family seed in her stomach. When she returned to High City, she was already the mother of a 3-year-old girl. Do you know how many years she hid it from Enchanting? Enchanting was the first to become a father. Feng Ling looked incredulous. Why haven't I heard of it? With Shi Nianj's personality, even if she lost her teeth, she would swallow her own blood. She even hid it from Enchanting for so long. How would others know? Even Wen Liqing can make a son out of Wen Linhan. Do you think I'm sour? Li Nanheng said as he pinched her waist and pressed her into his arms. I'm already 30 years old, it's 31. Feng Ling still had the time to correct him. Li Nanheng's face darkened. So I've been by your side for so many years. I've had you in my heart since your chest was not fully developed. I've been treating you for more than 10 years, but in the end, I'm actually the last one to give birth to a child. Chapter 1409. How could such a thing be counted as being at the bottom? Feng Ling was dumbfounded. The air fell silent again. I've had a dream since I was young. I want to find a woman I like, give birth to a son or daughter, and throw them to the 4 elders. I want them to feel the familial love of 2 generations apart. Let's see if they still dare to slap their great-grandchildren with a belt. Li Nanheng covered his eyes and shook his head after a while. He said solemnly, I wonder if they can live to that day. Feng Ling, with that, Li Nanheng let go of her and stood up to walk to the floor-to-ceiling window. In the darkness, he faced out of the window. His back view was surrounded by a trace of heavy helplessness, tolerance, and forbearance, as though the man covered in blood in the Israeli river was slowly looking up at the sky with heavy footsteps. Then he symbolically shook his head to show that his heart was really very vicissitude. Feng Ling held her forehead and was defeated. Give birth, didn't I not use any contraceptive measures last night? You've already put it in. I don't plan on taking any medicine. I'll just leave it to fate. If I'm really pregnant, I'll give birth. You agreed just like that? Qin Shuk looked in disbelief at Feng Ling, who had always been very calm when it came to relationships. She actually agreed to have a child. Feng Ling and Li Nanheng had already rushed from Los Angeles to New York for 2 days. Li Nanheng was still waiting for the surgery at Dr. York's place. This doctor was indeed very reliable. Yesterday, he only took a morning to confirm that he could be cured. He only needed to undergo a simple minor surgery. After the surgery, he could be discharged in about 4 to 3 days. This was equivalent to the week that Mr. Mo and Dr. Chin had fought for him. Lee Nanheng could finish the eye surgery and return to Los Angeles after leaving the hospital. However, Lee Nanheng did not ask her to stay in the hospital. He only told her to return to the Fong family or Chin Shuk to wait for his news. Coincidentally, Chin Shuk knew that she had returned to New York, so she rushed to the hospital and brought Fong Ling back to the company. It had been a long time since she returned to the company. Right now, this place was no longer completely under her management. When Fong Ling entered, she even wore a mask to prevent the employees from recognizing her. She successfully entered Chin Shuk's office. After all, he's about to undergo eye surgery. He needs to be in a good mood during the recovery period. Besides, this kind of thing is up to fate. If I still take contraceptive pills at this time, I'm afraid he'll jump off the operating table and strangle me. Fong Ling sat on the sofa in the office and casually flipped through the company documents. After a while, she felt a headache. How did she survive in this pile of documents in the past few years? It was really not suitable for her. She would get a headache if she looked at it for a while, and her eyes would probably hurt if she looked at it for a while longer. Now that you're willing to stay by his side, he can't wait to dote on you like you're his sweetheart. How would he dare to pinch you? Chin Shuk chuckled. However, I suggest that you consider having a child after his eyes recover. Otherwise, he won't even be able to help the child change diapers. I'm not pregnant now. I didn't think too much about it. Besides, I'll be pregnant for 10 months. If I'm really pregnant one day, maybe if he's happy, the blood clot that oppresses the optic nerve will be stimulated away. As Fong Ling spoke, she put down the documents in her hands. In fact, she was just joking casually. She then said seriously, now I'm at the age to get married and start a family. In the past, I could squander a few more years because I was young. Now that I think about it, I'm really wasting my time. Lee Nanheng is like a lone wolf. In this world, I'm afraid only you won't be completely swallowed by him. Ordinary people really can't suppress someone like him. Really? Fong Ling curved her lips and recalled that Lee Nanheng had jokingly called her little wolf girl a few times. Wolves were loyal by nature, just like her loyalty to 11 Base and Lee Nanheng. If she was destined to be with wolves since she was young, she really didn't mind having a little wolf cub with Lee Nanheng. At this moment, Fong Ling's phone rang. The call was from the Fong family. She glanced at it and picked it up. Matriarch Feng's voice came from the other end of the phone. Good granddaughter, you're back in New York, aren't you? Coincidentally, Grandma has something to tell you. Should we look for you, or will you come home? I'm with Shuk. I can go home directly. Fong Ling heard Matriarch Feng's voice. Although they had only known each other for a few years, she was still very close to this grandmother. Her voice became much gentler. Is it something important? It's nothing much. It's mainly because the Wen family heard about little Momo and sent someone over to ask for the child. Although they're from the Wen family, didn't you say that Wen Liqing specially handed the child to you and didn't send him back to the Wen family? This means that there's something wrong, so we didn't dare to hand the child over to them. Recently, the Wen family has been sending people over frequently. I'm worried. Coincidentally, you're back. Fong Ling was silent for a moment. I understand. I'll go back later. What's wrong? Seeing that Fong Ling had put down the phone and was about to leave, Chin Shuk sat behind a pile of documents on the desk and looked up at her. I'll go take a look at little Momo's problem. Help me keep an eye on the hospital. All right, if there's any news from Lee Nanheng, he'll definitely contact you immediately. Chin Shuk gave her a Don T bully me a single expression. The driver is downstairs. Don't drive yourself. Let the driver send you back. Fong Ling nodded and left. When she returned to the Fong family, little Momo was sitting in the small sand pile in the yard, playing with a small toy car. When he heard the sound of a car outside, he did not even look outside. He turned his head and shouted, "Great-grandma! There's a car!" There was a servant guarding by the side. When she saw Fong Ling return, she quickly nodded at her. Fong Ling smiled and looked at little Momo. As expected, less than 2 minutes after he shouted, Matriarch Fong rushed out as though she was afraid that the child would be taken away by some random person. When she saw it was Fong Ling, her expression relaxed. "You're back so quickly?" Fong Ling nodded and walked to little Momo. She leaned in front of the child and bent down to look at him. "Little Momo, it's been a few months. Do you still remember Auntie?" Little Momo finally lifted his attention from the toy car in his hand. The moment he saw Fong Ling, he was stunned for a moment before he grinned and jumped into her arms. "Sister, Io, my little ancestor, your hands are covered in sand. You haven't washed your hands." Seeing that Fong Ling's clothes were instantly dirted, the servant slapped her thigh and cried out. She rushed forward to pull the child away. "It's all right. There are clothes at home. I'll change later." Fong Ling picked the little thing up and lowered her head to kiss his face. Chapter 14:10. Did you miss me? Fong Ling carried little Momo into the Fong family's villa. Seeing that Fong Ling had returned, Grandfather Fong rushed out to welcome her. Fong Ling was the only granddaughter in the family. Recently, it was all thanks to little Momo's presence that the two elders' attention had been diverted. Otherwise, if Fong Ling wasn't in New York, they would really miss her. "Did you accompany Nanheng back to New York to treat his eyes? How has he been recently?" Grandfather Fong asked. "His body is much better. He's already recovered to 70 to 80% of his previous state. His eyes just came back to find Dr. Yorko for targeted treatment. I don't know what will happen after this treatment, but everything is developing in a good direction." "Don't worry," Fong Ling placed little Momo on the sofa and answered warmly. "That's good." Elder Fong nodded. "In the past, you were always running around the base and doing bloody things. Now that he's recuperating, all of you should live a peaceful and leisurely life. It's good to gradually leave the base and the original circle of fighting and killing." Her sense of mission for the base had long been deeply rooted in her bones. Even if she didn't go back, she couldn't throw these things away. How could she leave that circle? Fong Ling smiled and didn't answer. She rubbed little Momo's head and asked, "Who from the Wen family is coming to pick him up?" "It's Wen Liqing's uncle. A few years ago, something happened to the Wen family. Some of the family members left, some were injured, and some died. There aren't many left, but we don't know much about her uncle. He only said that he heard that Wen Liqing's child was here. He said that he didn't want to trouble us too much and wanted to take the child away. We didn't agree, and he didn't dare to be too rash in the Fong family. However, recently, he often came to visit the child and tried to coax Momo away. Momo might have watched his mother being beaten since he was young, but he's very vigilant. He's never willing to let anyone carry him, so he's safe here," Grandmother Fong walked over and said. Hearing that Momo was very vigilant, Fong Ling lowered her head to look at the little thing who was sitting on the sofa and stretching out his soft arms to hold her. She sat down beside him and the little thing took the opportunity to climb back into her arms. He lay in her arms and smelled the fragrance on her body. He obediently stopped moving. "I haven't received any news about Wen Liqing recently. I don't know how she is. Since the child has been handed over to me, she can't be taken away by others. Arrange 2 more security guards here, and someone must always follow the child. As long as the Fong family is here, the Wen family won't dare to do anything." She patted little Momo's head and whispered in his ear, "Be good and stay here. Don't walk around with strangers. Auntie and Auntie's grandparents will protect you, understand?" Although little Momo was only 2 years old, his EQ and IQ were very high. He first looked at her for a while as though he was slowly understanding what she said. Then he obediently nodded and hugged her neck, refusing to let go. "This child is really cute. He's smart, and sweet. He calls us great-grandfather and great-grandmother every day, making your grandfather, and I feel like he's our great-grandson. Grandmother Feng looked at little Momo with a sincere and loving smile. If when Liqing comes back and has nowhere to go, let her bring the child to stay with the Feng family. We can be her companions and help her take care of the child. Feng Ling curved her lips. This suggestion was good, but she didn't know where Wen Liqing had gone. Recently, there had been no news of Dr. Wen. Yesterday, she heard from Qin Shuk that the Wen family had come to New York to look for someone. They seemed to have come to look for Dr. Wen, but there was no news of Dr. Wen. He didn't seem to be in America. It had been a few months. Dr. Wen should have found Wen Liqing, but she didn't know what had happened. He hadn't returned yet. Fortunately, the child was with her. If he were to be handed over to someone else, no one would be at ease. So, is boss going to stay in the hospital with his eyes covered for another 3 to 4 days? In the hospital, Li Nanheng, who had quickly undergone a minor eye surgery, had just been sent to the ward to rest when Feng Ling received a call and heard Kay and the others' complaints. Li Nanheng had yet to wake up because of the anesthesia. Feng Ling had asked Dr. Yorko earlier and said that the surgery was very successful. In addition to the treatment in the past few months, the blood clots that had been affecting his vision had actually been eliminated. There was only a little left that was not easy to absorb, so he directly performed a small surgery. Thankfully, there was no need for a craniotomy. He only needed to perform a simple surgery on the surface of his head, neck, and eyes. If he recuperated properly in the hospital this time, he should be able to see soon. However, his vision might not be as clear as before. It would be blurry for a period of time, and then he would often do eye training. In a few months, he would be fine. Dr. Yorko's words were not ambiguous. Instead, he was very certain that his eyes would recover and that the surgery would be very successful. This made Feng Ling's mood very good. She stood in the corridor of the hospital and had the leisure to listen to Kay's complaints on the phone. After listening to the complaints on the other side of the phone, Feng Ling entered the ward. This ward was specially arranged by Dr. Yorko for Li Nanheng. It could be said that Dr. Qin and Mr. Amo had made an overseas call. The environment was very good. Downstairs was facing the bustling downtown area of New York. The floor was very high, and the air outside was not bad. However, because Li Nanheng had just undergone a minor surgery, he could not be exposed to the wind, so the windows were not opened. She went to pour some water and went to the bedside. Although she was in the hospital again, this time, he could be discharged in 3 or 4 days. She did not pack anything and planned to stay here for a few days. She had just sat on the edge of the bed to check if the effects of the anesthetic had worn off. In the end, the moment she sat down, her hand was still on the edge of the bed. The man who had been quietly lying on the bed moved his hand over, placed it on the back of her hand, and gently held it. "You're awake? Does the wound hurt?" Feng Ling looked at the gauze around his eye. "It's not a knife wound. Dr. Yorko used a very small, minimally invasive surgery. It's a pinhole. There won't be any traces." Li Nanheng's voice was hoarse after he woke up from the anesthesia. He then curved his lips. "After this surgery, I'll be able to see it. What kind of appearance do you plan on using to appear in front of me? After all, it's the first time I see you after regaining your sight." Feng Ling seemed to consider it seriously and said seriously, "Shall I cut my hair short to celebrate?" I was driving too fast yesterday and my alternate account was blown up. I had no other choice. If you guys are really anxious, you can go to WB and see if there are any sisters who have saved their accounts for me. Today is the last day of the double monthly votes. Those who have monthly votes, please vote for me to soothe my blown-up mood. I'm tearing up. Chapter 14:11. Li Nanheng seemed to have choked on his own saliva because of her words. He coughed twice and raised his hand, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. However, because the anesthetic had just worn off, his body could not move on its own. He only raised it a little before putting it down again. Fong Ling lowered her head and leaned in front of him. Li Nanheng took the opportunity to grab her long hair that had fallen down. His fingers gently wrapped around her hair and he sighed slightly. It's all good. Even if you really shave your head and appear in front of me, you're still my wife. You can't run away. Fong Ling chuckled and looked at his face. The surgery has just been done. No matter how small the wound is, it still hurts. Don't move around. I'll stay here and not wander around. Rest well. After the recovery period is over, you can see the light again. What's the probability of seeing it in a few days? Li Nanheng asked. Fong Ling thought for a moment. He said it's a very high probability. He's very sure. No matter how low the probability is, there's still a chance of failure. Li Nanheng still gently held her long hair. If I can't recover after this surgery, I'm afraid in the future. Before Li Nanheng could finish speaking, Fong Ling had already brought the cup to his mouth and placed a straw in the cup. Don't talk so much. Drink some water. Li Nanheng stopped talking. After drinking a few mouthfuls of water, his lips looked much better. Li Nanheng, there aren't so many ifs. When Fong Ling took the cup away, her expression was calm as she said calmly, just like when everyone thought you and Kay were dead, I said you were definitely still alive. Your eyes will also recover. Even if you really have to be blind for the rest of your life, if you dare to push me away like you did at Gorkin Farm and refuse to acknowledge me, you can try. Perhaps sensing the threat in her words, Fong Ling was not a person who would casually speak harshly. However, if he dared to push her away again, even if he didn't push her away, she would not turn back. Even if she died, she would not turn back. Li Nanheng chuckled. Okay, I won't push you away. She gently massaged his arm, which was a little numb from the anesthesia. After thinking for a moment, she said, this weekend, I'll accompany Qin Shuk to attend a charity dinner. I might not be able to come back for 2 days. Take good care of yourself in the hospital. I'll be back on Monday. Didn't you already resign? You want to attend a business banquet? Back then, I personally went to discuss the cooperation. The other party is an old man in his 60s. I respect him very much. He used his birthday as an opportunity to hold a charity banquet and invited many people, including me. Although I'm no longer in the phone corporation, they clearly know that I've returned to New York. My name is in the invitation letter. If I don't go, it won't be good for the phone corporation and Qin Shuk. Besides, I should give him some face. Qin Shuk nodded and said, I'm a very important partner 2 years ago. I've always taken good care of the phone corporation. Besides, I should give him some face. It was rare for Fong Ling to speak so much in one breath. Furthermore, she explained the reason why she had to go. She was no longer as lazy as before, no matter what she did, and she was too lazy to look at others. Fong Ling, who had always been unfamiliar with the ways of the world, had now worked hard in the business world. No matter when, she would remember the people who had helped her. Does this old man have any marriageable sons, grandchildren, or nephews? Li Nanheng was silent for a while, deep in thought. A moment later, he suddenly asked. Fong Ling subconsciously answered, no, I think he only has a daughter. His daughter is almost 37 or 8 years old. She's still unmarried. She takes good care of me. She's a strong woman in the business world. Hearing this, Li Nanheng's expression relaxed a little. And then let's go. Fong Ling took a look at him and realized what he meant. Was he afraid that someone would send him a love rival? She couldn't help but laugh. It's just that she used to be friends with my grandparents. She knows that my parents got into an accident and I've been homeless for too many years before I finally returned home. She's very kind to me, so she's helped me a lot. It's not what you think. It's best if it's not. If it is, it doesn't matter. Not to mention that I can't see, even if I'm disfigured, you'll still be loyal to me. Those men outside won't have a chance, Li Nanheng said without blushing or panting. Feng Ling held her forehead. 3 days later, on the weekend. In the banquet hall on the first floor of a royal 7-star hotel in New York. Qin Shuk and Feng Ling walked into the red carpet hall side by side. The two of them had their own companions today and did not bring any other male companions or secretaries. Suddenly, 2 natural beauties walked in at the same time. For a moment, the hall became much livelier, and many single men came forward to greet them. In this world, it's said that women are materialistic, but men are just as realistic. Qin Shuk took the goblet with a smile and clinked glasses with the single men who came to greet her. At the same time, she deliberately turned around and stood in front of Feng Ling to prevent Feng Ling from being too cold and embarrassing. At the same time, she gave Feng Ling a look and the two of them spoke quietly. Although Feng Ling had been in the business world for a few years, when Jean Wan and Little 8 appeared in England, she usually learned from the back. After returning to China, she had Qin Shuk as her companion, so every time there was such an occasion, she didn't have to go up to clink glasses and smile. This kind of thing was really easy for Qin Shuk, this lively little woman, to do. However, only Feng Ling knew that Qin Shuk was the kind of beauty who could talk and laugh on the surface and even dare to talk about one-night stands, but in fact, after the social interaction ended and she turned around, there would definitely be no more smile on her face. She was actually very conservative and calm, so even now, in front of others, this Qin Shuk seemed to be a glib-tongued woman who knew more than men, but her private life was actually very clean. Feng Ling also casually picked up the goblet that the waiter brought over. She placed it in her hand and was not in a hurry to drink it. She looked at the men who Qin Shuk deliberately blocked and gave her a "you really understand me" look. Then the two of them continued to walk in. Qin Shuk smiled at the men who came to greet her from time to time and looked at Feng Ling with a smile. People were indeed very realistic, just as she had said. In the past few years, the Feng Corporation's foundation was on the verge of collapse. Feng Ling and Qin Shuk tried their best to support the Feng Corporation, but everyone could see that they were in a precarious situation. Not only would they not lend a helping hand, but they would also watch coldly from the side. At that time, when the two of them came to attend such a banquet together, they mostly received cold glances. Those eyes were filled with, "Who are these two? Where are they from? I've never heard of them. I don't know them." Chapter 14:12. And now, because the Feng Corporation had taken back Tieming, it had received another $1 billion of financing. It had successfully begun to implement the key projects that had been shelved. Many people in the circle were optimistic about it. Right now, the Feng Corporation was rich in funds, and the company's market value had doubled. It had almost become a dark horse in the circle, and everyone was optimistic about it. Thus, the gazes of these people changed. Especially those single men. They found out that although the Feng Corporation was now under Qin Shuk's management, Feng Ling was still the legal heir of the Feng family. She was also the legal representative of the company. Qin Shuk was also a golden bachelor. These two women were still unmarried and should be single. They had long been tempted by them and rubbed their palms together, wanting to hook up with them. Back then, those financing and shelved projects were all prepared when you were still around. In the end, when the company finally started to make a name for itself, you left. Don't think that you can get away with it just because you piled all the credit on me. Look at these people. Their eyes are very sharp. They can tell that you still have the entire Feng family behind you. The two of us are 2 pieces of fat meat in their eyes. Qin Shuk turned her head to Feng Ling and lowered her voice. Feng Ling smiled lightly. "I'm almost out of this circle. How fat can I be? That's different. As long as you don't get married and announce to the world who your man is, these people won't give up," Qin Shuk said as she leaned close to her ear. As Qin Shuk spoke, she leaned close to her ear. "Back then, there were some rumors between you and Li Nanheng that reached these people's ears, but after so long, they didn't see any splashes. They only thought that the two of you had a temporary marriage and had long separated. Now, this group of people even said that they wanted to go to the Feng family to be their son-in-law. Feng Ling raised her brows slightly. Is that so? Seeing her calm expression, Qin Shuk knew that every time she told her about all kinds of gossip and interesting things, she would get this kind of response. The topic would always be interrupted. She waved her hand in boredom. Forget it. It doesn't matter if you announce it to the world or not. Anyway, you only have him in your heart from beginning to end. You won't even look at other men. Why should I worry here? At this moment, someone came over to greet her. As usual, Qin Shuk blocked them and personally went up to clink glasses with them, leaving Feng Ling to enjoy the peace alone. Feng Ling held the wine glass and turned around. From the corner of her eye, she suddenly caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. As expected, the tall man with a mixed-race face turned around without hesitation the moment he saw her. Miss Feng. When the man walked over, there was still some surprise in his eyes. Obviously, he really didn't expect to meet her here. He then looked around her and didn't see any male companions or friends. He was even more surprised and asked, "Are you alone?" Feng Ling nodded. Mr. Ian. The last time they parted was a few years ago in England. This man named Ian had covered the rooftop of their bank building with roses and a candlelight dinner. In the end, such a romantic scene was destroyed by Li Nanheng's helicopter. Although she had clearly rejected him, she did not give him a good explanation before she was taken away from England. Feng Ling was actually a little embarrassed to suddenly meet him here. Especially back then, Li Nanheng had taken her away as though he was snatching a girl away. Mr. Ian had seen that scene with his own eyes. Me and my cousin. Feng Ling glanced at Qin Shuk, who was dealing with the others behind her. Mr. Ian glanced over and then looked at Feng Ling. He smiled. It's been a few years since we last met, but you're still so beautiful. Your hair has grown a lot longer. Now, it's really waist length. I heard from Jean Wan that you used to keep your hair short when you were in your teens. Feng Ling didn't respond directly but smiled. It's all in the past. The topic had just begun, but Qin Shuk had already keenly noticed that there was a man chatting up Feng Ling. She dealt with the man in front of her and turned to rush over. She stepped forward and pulled Feng Ling's arm, only to see that there was a smile on Feng Ling's face. From what she said, they should know each other. Qin Shuk glanced at Mr. Ian again and asked Feng Ling, "Who is this man?" When I was studying in England, Mr. Zan's younger brother, named Ian, was the deputy president of the London Bank. I don't know if he's in a higher position now. It's been many years since we last met, so I don't know much about him, Feng Ling answered softly. After understanding the situation, Qin Shuk glanced at him again and then commented in a low voice, "This Mr. Ian likes you." Feng Ling, it had been so many years, and when they met, they only greeted each other politely. How could Qin Shuk see through it so easily? Why couldn't she see the emotions in his eyes? I'm right, right? In the past, he did have some thoughts about me, but he's fine. He won't pester me. It's just a reunion. Hearing this, Qin Shuk gave up on the idea of sending him away. She nodded. All right, you guys take your time to catch up. I'll go chat with those two boys for a while. What do you want to talk about? Feng Ling was surprised. Those two shameless people secretly spoke dirty words to me. If I don't scold them until they are speechless, Qin Shuk, will write my name backwards. With that, Qin Shuk drank all the wine in the glass, put down the glass, and turned to walk back. Feng Ling turned back to look at her. Seeing that there were people here, she looked away. Mr. Ian had already approached. Seeing that Feng Ling's expression was a little dazed, his gaze warmed up. How have you been in the past few years after returning to America? Feng Ling did not reject this way of reminiscing with old friends. She nodded calmly. Not bad. When I left England, I didn't have the time to say goodbye to you. I'm really sorry. I watched you leave, Mr. Ian said. As he spoke, he deliberately glanced behind her. Only your cousin came with you? Where's Mr. Li? Fong Ling glanced at him. Seeing that Fong Ling didn't seem to know how to explain why Li Nanheng didn't come with her, Mr. Ian interrupted her with a gentle smile. Look at my question. It's not appropriate. Young people, it's normal for relationships to be on and off. Fong Ling, ? Did he mean that she had already broken up with Li Nanheng? Or could it be that he had also heard some gossip in the New York business circle and thought that she was the same as Qin Shuk, a golden single leftover woman? Chapter 14:13. It's rare for Mr. Ian to come to America as a guest. Are you here to discuss financial cooperation? Fong Ling asked. Yes. Is this your first time in America? Not really. I've been here a few times before, but this is my first time in New York. Seeing that Fong Ling would take the initiative to chat, Ian's gaze became much gentler. He looked at her with the same expression as when he was in England. Fong Ling curved her lips and said without changing her expression, since it's your first time in New York, you're not familiar with many things here, so it's better not to take the gossip in the New York business circle seriously. What do you mean? I mean, the rumors about me among these people. Fong Ling's voice was calm and indifferent. Fong Ling's voice was quiet and indifferent. Whether it was back in England or now, I've never been single. Before she could finish speaking, there was a sudden commotion outside the banquet hall. Hearing the voice and seeing that the people around seemed to be talking about something, Fong Ling instinctively turned her head. When she glanced at the door of the banquet hall, she saw a familiar figure walking through the crowd. Soon, he entered the bright banquet hall from the ink-like night. Today, in order to accompany Qin Shuk, she was wearing a deep V-neck black gown. It was sexy, but it did not expose anything that should not be exposed. When she turned around, she held the hem of the dress with one hand and held a goblet of red wine with the other. Her gaze shifted slightly and landed on that person. The surroundings were still filled with laughter and toasts. Everyone's eyes were filled with extravagance. Fong Ling's gaze landed on the person's eyes. She saw the man's figure clearly and found that he had accurately discovered her direction. His gaze was directed at her and met her eyes across the sea of people. Without hesitation, he strode over from the crowd. When she was sure that his eyes were really looking at her and that his deep eyes were dark and bright, no longer unfocused but focused on her, Fong Ling's heart tightened and then pounded violently. Mr. Li? Is that CEO Li? It seems like I haven't heard any news about CEO Li for a long time. When did CEO Li come to New York? Do you know about any partners related to the Li Corporation? I'm not sure. I haven't heard any news about Mr. Li recently. There were whispers around, but Fong Ling stared at Li Nanheng's eyes and tightened her grip on the goblet countless times. He could see. Today is the weekend. Didn't Dr. Yorko say to discharge you tomorrow? Will he be discharged tonight? Before she could react, the man had already approached with a familiar cold aura. He was still cold and didn't want to look at others. He stepped forward and glanced at her. Why didn't Qin Shuk come with you? Leave you here alone? As soon as he finished speaking, Li Nanheng decisively took off his black suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders, covering all the sexy and fair skin on her V-neck gown that should not be seen by others. At the same time, he held her with his long arms, silently declaring his ownership of her. Oh my God, Li, cousin-in-law, did you specially kill your way here from the hospital? Qin Shuk reacted to what had happened and quickly leaned over. However, because Li Nanheng was here, his aura made her habitually shrink to the side. She did not dare to get too close and only whispered, how could I leave her here alone? I was quarreling with two scumbags just now, okay? The distance between Fong Ling and me is less than 3 meters. Besides, she's so good at martial arts. If anything happens, she'll be the one to protect me. How useful can I be with her? The word cousin-in-law successfully reduced the coldness in Li Nanheng's eyes. He glanced at Qin Shuk as though he was praising her for being sensible. However, Feng Ling was unable to speak for a moment. The people around them were all talking about it. After all, there seemed to be something fishy going on between the second miss of the Feng family and Li Nanheng. It had been rumored in the circle for a while, but no one mentioned it since there was no news. She didn't expect it to be true. Putting on clothes in public and hugging her, it was clear that their relationship had reached a certain level. Furthermore, they were arrogant and calm. There was no need to hide it in public. The moment Ian saw Li Nanheng, a flash of surprise flashed across his eyes. Then, he seemed to understand what Feng Ling wanted to say. Although it was a little awkward, fortunately, nothing too awkward happened. He only smiled. "Mr. Li, nice to meet you." Li Nanheng glanced at him with a fake smile but did not even look him in the eye. He did not reply. He only raised his hand to touch his wife's hair and said in a low voice that only she could hear, "Didn't you say you wanted to cut your hair short to help me welcome the new light? In the end, you're dressed so sexily and with long hair fluttering in the wind for other men to see?" Feng Ling's eyelids twitched and she glared at him. "I just casually wore a gown, and Qin Shuk ordered it for me. I just wore it." "Casually? It's indeed casual for you to wear so little. I feel like my head is turning green when I'm lying in the hospital. Thankfully, I came in time. Otherwise, this Englishman would probably bring you to the rooftop to lay roses." As Li Nanheng spoke, he glanced at the deep V-neck on her chest with disdain and tightened the suit jacket on her body. He wished he could help her button it. "Li Nanheng, you can see now and think you're capable, right? You." Feng Ling wanted to scold him, but she held it in. For a moment, she couldn't care less about the gazes of everyone around her. She stared at his eyes for a long time and saw that there were only tiny needle holes around his eyes. There were indeed no obvious wounds, but because he had just passed the postoperative recovery period, his eyelids looked a little whiter than usual, and his double eyelids looked much bigger after being applied with the medicine. In fact, they were just swollen, but when this man's eyes were swollen, only his double eyelids were a little bigger. Those who didn't know would think that he had just woken up and there was nothing unusual. In addition, he had gained a lot of weight recently, so he was indeed not much different from before. Thus, she paused and continued to stare into his eyes. "Can you really see?" Li Nanheng glanced at her. "I can still see you smiling happily at another man just now. Do you think I should go back to being blind?" Feng Ling. Chapter 14:14. Seeing that Feng Ling was clearly being hugged, Mr. Ian was about to say something when Qin Shuk stepped forward. "Mr. Ian, my cousin-in-law and cousin often quarrel. Don't you understand our daily lives? Do you know what it means to quarrel, the deeper our relationship becomes? The two of them are like this. This is your first time in New York. What kind of cooperation are you talking about? Come, let's chat for a while." Ian's brows moved. He glanced at Qin Shuk and was dragged away by her. Before Feng Ling's expression changed because of his words, Li Nanheng hugged her even more tightly. He lowered his head and whispered in her ear, "I just took off the gauze. My vision is still a little blurry, but it doesn't affect my normal life. The moment I opened my eyes, I rushed over. I planned to support my wife, but when I came in, I saw you standing with that Englishman." Feng Ling immediately rolled her eyes at him. "Don't be jealous. I just met him. I was just greeting him." Li Nanheng did not intend to say anything more to Ian. He lowered his head to look at her trembling eyelashes and immediately understood her current emotions. His eyes had just recovered from the postoperative recovery period and he had come over. Li Nanheng, who had regained his light, was not used to facing him. Seeing the hint of embarrassment hidden in her eyes, Li Nanheng pressed his forehead against hers. "When my eyes recover, I'll come to look for you. How about it? Are you touched?" Feng Ling glanced at him and met his eyes. Seeing her reflection in his eyes, her lips moved slightly. Before she could speak, the man suddenly pressed the back of her head and kissed her lips without hesitation. Fong Ling. This was a public place. There were people all around. Was he crazy? Sure enough, in an instant, the banquet hall was filled with all kinds of exclamations. The men whistled, the women exclaimed in surprise, and then a burst of applause erupted. Fong Ling couldn't resist in front of everyone. She gripped his shirt tightly and glared at him, warning him not to do this in front of so many people. Li Nanheng, who seemed to have finally received her warning gaze, was very calm. As though there was no one else around, he held her in his arms and turned to leave with her in the crowd. He ignored all the curious questions and exclamations behind him, as well as the people who tried to approach CEO Li to greet him. Li Nanheng actually took Fong Ling away just like that. Although he did not say anything, this scene was enough to tell all the single men in the New York business circle that Fong Ling belonged to him, Li Nanheng. No one could dream about it. Then, Qin Shuk suddenly saw the gazes gradually directed at her from all directions, and the corners of her mouth twitched fiercely. Ha, ha ha. My cousin and CEO Li have been together for a long time. Isn't this something that everyone in the industry already knows? It's just that the two of them have always been very low-key. Didn't you see that I call him cousin-in-law? We've always been a family. The two of them have been together for many years and have always been very close. Some time ago, the two of them even went to Israel for a trip and brought back a lot of local specialties. I'll bring them back for everyone to share, Qin Shuk explained to everyone while cursing in her heart. Li Nanheng, this scumbag. He actually asked her to help him wipe his ass. He was too arrogant to take Fong Ling away just like that, okay? She still had to stay behind to deal with the aftermath. Why did he have to bully a single dog like her? Fong Ling was brought back to the car by Li Nanheng. At a glance, she saw his car parked outside. The man pushed and shoved her into the car. There was no one else in the car. Clearly, he drove here himself. Fong Ling was about to ask him why he drove himself. He didn't even have clear vision and drove here. Did he not know how to cherish his life after being saved? If he couldn't see clearly and got into a car accident, she really couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't be able to live to marry her. In the end, before she could say anything, the man followed her into the back door. After closing the door with a bang, he pushed her heavily inside, pressed her down, and kissed her hard on the lips. You. Li Nanheng, you. Fong Ling was a little dazed by his sudden passionate kiss. She rushed to push him away, but the man's hand held her waist firmly and pressed her hard against the leather seat behind the car. Like a wolf that had been hungry for a long time, he kissed her hard, kissed her, sucked her, and even nibbled her. He kissed her until the oxygen in her lungs was almost squeezed dry. She could only lean weakly against the seat and let him kiss her. Her eyes blinked in the darkness of the car, and she could clearly feel his eagerness. He was eager to hug her, kiss her, and hold her completely in his arms. He was eager to press her against the car and kiss her when he could finally see her again. This kiss lasted for a long time. She could clearly feel the changes in the man's body, but he didn't seem to want to do it with her in the car. He just kept kissing her until her lips were numb and even slightly swollen. He sucked and kissed her rosier lips again and again. When he felt that her body had softened, the man finally stopped kissing her. He held her firmly in his arms, buried his face in her neck, and said hoarsely, "So fragrant." No matter how spacious the car was, with a tall man like Li Nanheng squeezing in from the back, it still seemed a little small. In this space, Fong Ling's face was slightly hot. She moved slightly, but she was still imprisoned in his arms. He held her very tightly. At the same time, she felt his breath on the side of her neck. He even used his lips to rub the artery on her neck, as though if she dared to move or struggle out of his arms, he would not hesitate to kiss her neck or bite her. Before Qin Shuk handed this gown to me, she seemed to have placed a bottle of perfume in the closet, causing the smell of perfume to come out of the clothes. Feng Ling's voice was a little hoarse. After being kissed for so long, her voice was no longer as calm and clear as usual. Instead, it was so soft that it made one's blood surge. It's probably the smell of perfume. No, it's the smell of your body. The man kissed her neck. He knew that if he left a hickey here, she would probably ignore him for the entire night, so he reluctantly moved the kiss to the soft flesh under her ear and gently sucked it. Because of the man's action, Feng Ling's entire body trembled. She held back her moan and almost cried out. Her shoulders trembled and her voice was hoarse. Don't. Chapter 14-15. However, because of her hidden moan, the man was really about to boil. His breathing became heavier by her ear. He kissed her earlobe and rubbed her hard in his arms. Don't move. I'll just kiss you for a while. Feng Ling was held in the man's arms. She could clearly feel that his lower body had already reached its limit. Her face was burning, and she did not dare to move. She was afraid that if she moved again, it would really ignite. It wasn't like this man had never done that to her in the car. I missed you. He kissed her ear, then her hair, and finally her neck. His breathing became heavier as he hugged her even tighter. He even sat her on his lap. I really missed you too much. Can you understand what I'm saying? N? The last word gradually moved upwards, carrying a deeper meaning. Feng Ling leaned in his arms and looked at him. So, the gauze on your eyes has just been removed. You didn't rest in the hospital for another day and directly came over? The man curved his lips and kissed the tip of her nose. What else did you think? Do you have any self-awareness as a patient? It's only been a few days since the surgery. Your body is still. Li Nanheng lowered his head and bit her nagging lips. He called her lips and said hoarsely, Don't you know how my body is? Patient? That was a few months ago. It's just a minor surgery on my eyes. I can be discharged in 3 or 4 days. Do I need to stay at home to recuperate? As he spoke, he kissed her lips again and held her in his arms. He held and kissed her as though she was a treasure and continued to bite her lips. The first thing I did after I could see was to come and see my wife. Am I wrong? All right. You're right. Why don't you bring a pair of glasses out to block the wind? Even if your eyes are completely healed in the future, if you end up crying at the sight of the wind, let's see who can treat you. Feng Ling couldn't be bothered to argue with him. She reached out and searched the car for a long time. She found a pair of sunglasses in the glove compartment and put them on for him. Fortunately, when he came to New York, he also asked someone to drive this car over. This pair of sunglasses was the one he wore when he brought him to the supermarket. Since then, it had been left in the car. It's so late. Should I wear sunglasses? Li Nanheng felt that the sunglasses were a hindrance and raised his hand to take them off. Don't take it off. Your eyes shouldn't be exposed to the wind now. Dr. Yorko said that after you leave the hospital, you have to recuperate well. At least for a month. Seeing that her eyes were much fiercer, Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows and put down his hand. All right, let's go back first. Back to where? Go home. The man lowered his head and rubbed his nose against the tip of her nose. I don't want to smell disinfectant in the hospital ever again. Then promise me that you won't let your eyes get exposed to the wind again. Once your eyes are completely healed, you can say goodbye to the hospital. Feng Ling knew that previously, he had to take medicine and apply medicine every day and had to deal with doctors back and forth. Right now, he really had a shadow of the hospital. All right. He still hugged her without letting go. Then let go of me. I'll go drive. Don't drive anymore. Feng Ling pushed him. Kiss me and let go. Feng Ling looked up at him. The man was wearing a pair of sunglasses in the dark car. No matter how she looked at him, he looked especially silly. She could not be fierce and helplessly raised her head to kiss his chin. Let's do this first. Let me go drive. The man let go of her in satisfaction. All right, let's do this first. We'll continue kissing when we get back. Fong Ling pretended not to hear him. As she retreated from his embrace, she quickly crawled through the gap between the two seats in front of her. Her suit jacket was also placed on the passenger seat. The man caught a glimpse of her sitting in the driver's seat in that gown. Seeing that her snow-white arms were exposed to the air, he felt his eyelids twitch. Previously, he could not see them and could only touch them every day. Now that he finally saw them again, he felt that no matter if it was this woman's expression or a certain piece of snow-white skin, even if it was just her hand in front of him, it would make him extremely hard. Don't you need to go back to the hospital first? Didn't the doctor say that you'll be discharged tomorrow? Fong Ling started the engine. There's no need. Dr. Yorko personally removed the gauze. He's recovering very well. He can go home directly. Hearing the man's words, Fong Ling did not ask further and drove the car out of the parking lot in front of the hotel. After all, this was New York. There was no apartment for the two of them. There was only an apartment near the company that Fong Ling had lived in. The space was quite large. On the way back, she put on her Bluetooth earpiece and called Qin Shuk. Knowing that Qin Shuk had already helped to deal with the aftermath, she still felt a little apologetic. After all, it was really difficult to escape from the curious questions of a group of people. Li Nanheng at least owed Qin Shuk a meal. In the future, he would definitely treat her well. Otherwise, Qin Shuk would not let the matter go so easily. After returning to the apartment and entering the elevator, Li Nanheng leaned over, pressed her against the elevator, and bent down to kiss her. I didn't starve you a few days ago. Do you have to look like you've been hungry for 800 years? Fong Ling was unable to escape from this man's kiss. She helplessly pushed his shoulder back. The man lowered his head and pecked her lips. That's different. What's different? Seeing and not seeing are completely different, Li Nanheng said as he pulled her into his arms. As Li Nanheng spoke, he pulled her into his arms again. When the elevator stopped, he brought her out of the elevator. The moment the door opened, Li Nanheng pushed her into the door. He was clearly very anxious. However, after entering the door, Fong Ling had just raised her hand to turn on the lights. Before she could take off her shoes, the man suddenly picked her up by the waist and carried her into the bedroom. She was about to say that it was his first time coming to her apartment in New York and that he was not familiar with the environment here, but he carried her all the way into the bedroom. Fong Ling could not say a word. She could only say that this man's adaptability was really strong. Back then, when he couldn't see in Los Angeles, he instinctively identified the direction. Now that he could see, he did not need to look anywhere else to find her bedroom. Li Nanheng, you, Fong Ling felt her body suddenly being thrown heavily onto the bed. The man pressed her down and kissed her heavily on the bed without hesitation, as though he wanted to make up for everything he hadn't kissed, touched, or seen in so many months. His heavy breathing brushed against her lips and face. He pulled open the zipper hidden at the waist of her gown and pulled it off without hesitation. Chapter 14-16. Fong Ling found that she really had no strength to resist. Even if she had the strength, as long as she met Li Nanheng's gaze, her entire body would soften. The scene of this man covered in blood at the Gorkin farm was still vivid in her mind. Now he was finally standing in front of her. The wounds on his body had healed, and his eyes could be seen. Her heart skipped a beat. While the man was focused on undoing their clothes, she raised her hand and touched the corner of his eyes. She then slowly stroked the corner of his eyes to the space between his brows. She then moved down bit by bit and stroked his eyelids. The man did not say anything. Because of her actions, he pinched her hand and kissed the back of her hand, palm, and fingers. This kiss was very hot, but also very gentle. In the end, he bit her fingertip and said hoarsely, "Fool, come back to your senses. You're not dreaming." Feng Ling abruptly came back to her senses. Facing his gaze, the man lowered his head and kissed her between her brows. His hands did not stop moving as he removed all the obstacles on their bodies. The moment their skin pressed against each other without any obstacles, Li Nanheng sighed in satisfaction. Throughout the night, Feng Ling's gown had been torn out of shape and thrown to the ground. From time to time, the bed would shake, and from time to time, there would be the sound of the man's heavy breathing and the woman's unbearable moans, for 2 consecutive days. Feng Ling couldn't believe it. She had actually been tied to the bed by Li Nanheng for 2 days. After eating, he would continue. After showering, he would continue. Even when she was so tired that she wanted to carry him to sleep, he would move on his own. After 2 days, no matter how good Feng Ling's stamina was, she was already seeing stars. Several times, she wanted to beat him up, but she couldn't beat him. In the end, she didn't know if she had fallen asleep or fainted from exhaustion. In short, she refused to move again. At noon 2 days later, Feng Ling raised her head from under the blanket. Seeing that Li Nanheng was not in the bedroom, she quickly sat up from the bed, only to find that her clothes were not in the bedroom. She could only wrap herself in the blanket and open the closet in the bedroom to find clothes. When she walked out of the bedroom, she still felt a little weak. When he went out, he noticed that the light in the living room was a little dim because the lights were not turned on. When he looked outside, he saw that it was raining outside. This kind of weather made people lazy, and there was no need for her to go out. She rubbed her messy hair and was about to pour herself a glass of water when she suddenly heard a ding from the kitchen. Then, the tall man walked out of the kitchen, holding a glass of warm milk in his hand. "Come here, have a glass of milk." Feng Ling didn't know how long she had slept, but it must have been more than 10 hours. Right now, her stomach was empty, and because of the weather, she felt a little cold. Glancing at the milk in his hand, she walked over, picked it up, and took a sip. It was still a little hot. She moved the glass away a little, wanting to drink it later. At the same time, she looked at the man who was in a particularly good state of mind. His hair was clean and neat, and she met his gaze. "Li Nanheng, it's indeed worth celebrating that your eyes have recovered, but isn't the way you celebrate too unreasonable? There's still a long way to go. Do you need to spend 2 days to take my life?" She complained as she turned around with the glass of milk. However, the moment she turned around, the man smiled and pulled her back into his arms. At the same time, he raised his hand to help her stabilize the glass that almost fell from her hand. He lowered his head and kissed her cheek. "I'm proving that I'm not hurt at all. Your man is your man. Whether you can see or not, you can only lie down obediently." Feng Ling's temples throbbed because of his words. She had really given him the cold shoulder for too long in the past. This man's desire to conquer her was always very strong, especially in bed. He definitely did not give her any face like he usually did. It was definitely from the perspective of conquering and being conquered. Feng Ling tilted her head slightly to avoid his kiss, but the man did not let go of her. He kissed her a few more times on the face, and in the end, he stood there and hugged her. At the same time, he kissed her ear. "I haven't seen you for a few months. My wife has become prettier again. Feng Ling. Can you not be so sour? Your attitude towards me now is much better than when you were in Washington." The man kissed her hair lightly. "Do you know how good I am now? This narcissistic man." Feng Ling turned back to scold him, but the man pressed her back against the wall. He held the back of her neck and gave her another long, deep kiss. Feng Ling's heart was alarmed. Afraid that he would throw her back on the bed again, she quickly struggled to say, the milk is going to be cold." Feng Ling's eyes widened. The man finally let go of her and touched the cup in her hand. "It's still a little hot. Drink slowly." Feng Ling answered blankly and quickly retreated from his arms. She stood by the side and drank the milk. In the past, she didn't like to drink this, but after returning to the Feng family, the servants always asked her to drink a cup before and after bed. Later, she gradually got used to it. Now, she would drink it occasionally. When Li Nanheng couldn't see, he would occasionally ask her to drink more milk. Right now, she didn't really dislike the taste of milk. Instead, she quite liked it. After finishing the cup of milk, she looked at the empty cup in her hand and asked, "You can see now. Do the elders of the Li family know about this? I haven't informed them yet. If they find out now, they'll probably tie the two of us back to get married and have children in 24 hours. Feng Ling, I really want to get married on the spot, but I can't make you feel wronged. We have to find a good place and have a grand wedding. You've been wronged enough since you were young. I don't want to give you such a big regret when you get married." As the man spoke, he reached over and rubbed her hair. He glanced at her. Long hair is really different from short hair. What's the difference? Before Feng Ling could recover from the grand wedding he mentioned, she was attracted by his words again. When your hair was short, it felt very obedient. I always wanted to hold you in my arms, kiss you, hug you, and coax you. He touched her hair again and then looked meaningfully at the remaining milk stains on her lips. He said, "When I touch your long hair, I really want to throw you back on the bed and have another 2 days and 2 nights, SS. Ah, hit me gently." Li Nanheng, who was suddenly slapped down by Feng Ling, turned green. "I'm still an injured patient. Why are you so heavy-handed?" Feng Ling expressionlessly placed the milk cup on the coffee table. "Injured? Go wash the cup." Chapter 14-17. Li Nanheng walked back with the empty milk cup. After washing the cup clean, he walked out and saw Feng Ling standing in front of the window. Outside the window, it was raining and thunder was rumbling, but inside the window, it was as warm as spring. To him, it had been too long since he last saw her. He missed her so much. 2 days and 2 nights was not his limit. If it weren't for the fact that she really couldn't take it anymore, he probably wouldn't have left the bed. But just by looking at her back, Li Nanheng felt that what he said when he touched her hair was not a lie. He really wanted to throw her back onto the bed. It was rare for her to recover from a serious illness, and it was rare for her to see. Li Nanheng walked over and pulled her into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her ear. "What's wrong? You're busy taking care of me every day. Are you used to it? Now that you suddenly don't have to do so many things, are you not used to it?" "No, I just want to sleep now." Feng Ling's waist and legs were still sore, and the weather outside was not suitable for going out. Looking at the heavy rain outside, the raindrops kept hitting the window. It was as though they had once struggled step by step in the rain of bullets and finally reached a life where they could safely stay behind the window. This inexplicable peace of mind, as well as the sudden hug from the man behind her, gradually softened Feng Ling's heart. Feeling the softness of the woman in his arms, Li Nanheng kissed her ear and then her cheek. He turned her around bit by bit, from her eyebrows to the tip of her nose, to the corner of her lips, and then to her chin. He kissed her neck and whispered, "I can see your eyes now. I can see all your expressions." His words were actually referring to something. This was because Feng Ling's current state of mind was completely different from before she went to Israel to look for him. At that time, she often kept a straight face and was too lazy to talk to him. She kept a distance from him. Even if they had a one-night stand in the resort, she would still choose to look at him coldly the next day. She would get into the car and leave without looking back. But now, she had worked so hard to find him and had stayed by his side for several months. It had been at least 4 months if not half a year. She was no longer the Feng Ling who was used to putting on a cold face in front of him. She was made of flesh and blood, and he was in her heart. Although Li Nanheng did not mention anything about the Gorkin farm in the past few months, he did feel guilty. At that time, it was also a downpour. That rainy night, she guarded outside for a long time. He refused to see her, but she did not leave. Her entire body was drenched before she was called in by Dr. Mona and Carrie. At that time, even though she had changed her clothes, when she carefully held his hand by his bed, her hand was still very cold. She did not catch a cold on the spot. She could only say that her good health was good. I'll go take a shower first. I haven after I woke. I haven. Since I woke, Fong said. Fong has. She really can't hold on any longer. This weather was suitable for doing what she loved to do at home. They couldn't go anywhere. Right now, there was nothing urgent in New York that required them to go out. Right now, she was like a fish on the chopping board. She was at his mercy and had no reason to resist. As soon as she finished speaking, she pushed him away and rushed back to the bedroom. In fact, when she was asleep, Lee Nanhung was used to washing or wiping her body, so her body was very clean. However, it was more comfortable to wash herself. She had just taken off her clothes, walked into the bathroom, and turned on the shower. Before she could adjust the temperature of the water to the most suitable level, the sound of the door opening came from the bedroom. Fong Ling paused and casually adjusted the water temperature. At this moment, the bathroom door was opened. Fong Ling was startled. She watched as the man walked into the bathroom and began to take off his clothes. She could clearly feel the desire in the man's eyes. Her heart immediately skipped a beat. She wanted to turn off the water and escape, but the tall man was standing at the bathroom door. She couldn't even stretch out a foot. The scene of being tormented by this man for 2 consecutive days until her throat was hoarse was still vivid in her mind. Fong Ling's throat instantly became a little dry and hoarse. You should know your limits. If this continues, I'm afraid I'll die in less than a month. As soon as she finished speaking, Lee Nanhung had already removed the restraints on his body and walked toward her. Fong Ling held the shower in her hand and subconsciously took a step back. She decisively refused. No, he didn't let her rest for 2 consecutive days. It wasn't easy for her to wake up. How could Fong Ling let Lee Nanhung fulfill his wish so quickly? However, Lee Nanhung was clearly in high spirits. After entering, he closed the door behind him and pressed toward Fong Ling, who was already in the corner of the bathroom. Fong Ling was about to spray him away with the showerhead when the man grabbed her wrist. Her back was instantly pressed against the cold tile wall. The coldness caused her body to shiver, and her grip on the showerhead tightened. Lee Nanhung slowly took the shower from his hand and hung it back up. He then attentively adjusted the water's stability. In a moment, the warm mist dyed the space in front of them. The surroundings were filled with white mist, perfectly enveloping the two of them. The atmosphere became even more hazy and even charming. Feeling that Lee Nanhung was unreasonably sticking to her, Fong Ling made a final struggle. Let me rest for a day first, or wait until it's dark. I just want to take a shower and rest. You. She felt that her physical strength really couldn't compare to his. Right now, this man was completely different from when he had just returned from Israel. He had completely recovered his beast nature. Lee Nanhung kissed the corner of her lips. Next time, you can shower after I fall asleep. Otherwise, I'll want to come in when I hear the sound of water. Chapter 14:18. Fong Ling felt the water droplets flowing down her collarbone. The man's kiss also moved down, and her entire body could not help but tremble. Lee Nanhung's hand groped around her waist and abdomen, then he held her face again. Under the shower, he gently bit her lips and kissed her beautiful chin and snow-white neck, leaving a crimson mark on the way down. Fong Ling swallowed back the voice that had surged to her throat. She supported herself against the wall with one hand so that she could stand more steadily and prevent herself from suddenly falling down in a daze. Lee Nanhung took this opportunity to lift her up and hold her around his waist. Fong Ling mumbled, "Not here." However, Lee Nanhung leaned closer and continued to bite her lips, kissing her moist and tender lips until they turned even redder. He was ready to move and rubbed against her. Fong Ling was really speechless from his actions. Slow down, Li Nanheng felt that it was not enough and turned her over. After an unknown period of time, Fong Ling's expression was filled with extreme pleasure and pain, and her eyes became unfocused. "Boss, let go of me, can't I?" In the last moment, Fong Ling really felt that she was going to die here. After a long while, she still hadn't returned to her senses. Li Nanheng held her in his arms, and in this posture, he squeezed some shampoo and directly applied it to Fong Ling's head. Right now, Fong Ling was completely powerless. She had long been pressed into the bathtub by the side. She leaned against it and weakly allowed him to wash her hair and then her body. As the man washed, he kissed her again. She raised her eyes to look at him in shock. She was really too tired. However, Li Nanheng took his time. As if very patiently washing her, he also washed himself, and then carried her out of the bathroom and placed her on the bed in the bedroom. At this time, it was still pouring outside. Taking advantage of Fong Ling's distraction, Li Nanheng pulled away her towel and pressed it against Fong Ling again. Under Fong Ling's hateful gaze, Li Nanheng lowered his head and kissed her, saying gently and hoarsely, "I love you, Fong Ling." In the end, Fong Ling did not know when she lost consciousness. She only vaguely felt the bed beside her rise and fall. The man came over to help her wipe her body, then lifted her leg to wipe again, and kissed her forehead. Fong Ling couldn't take it anymore. She closed her eyes and fell into darkness. The next day, in the morning, Dr. Yorko, who rarely visited private homes, called to ask for the address. He then drove over personally for the routine examination that Li Nanheng had done every 3 days after he was discharged. The weather outside was not bad today. It wasn't easy for Fong Ling to sleep for a long time. After waking up, she opened the door for Dr. Yorko, packed up, and left. "Where are you going?" Seeing that she was about to go out, Li Nanheng, who had just been helped by Dr. Yorko to sit upright on the sofa, shifted his gaze in her direction. "This is New York after all. The Fong family is here. I'm going home to visit the 2 elders. Is there a problem?" Fong Ling had been bullied by this man for the past 2 to 3 days. It was rare for an outsider to be around, so it wasn't good for her to put on a cold expression. However, for the time being, she was unwilling to pay attention to this beast. Her voice was indifferent. Go ahead. Help me bring a good word." Li Nanheng gave her a look. Fong Ling pretended not to receive his gaze and turned to leave. Her original intention was to return to the Fong family. After all, Li Nanheng's eyes had recovered and he didn't need to stay in New York for too long. He would probably return to Los Angeles soon. Although the Fong family had an old residence in Los Angeles, she still had to ask the 2 elders if they wanted to stay in New York or return to Los Angeles with her. However, Fong Ling felt that they were old and not suitable for trouble, so she had to consider many aspects for them. She also needed to go home to discuss. On the way back to the Fong family, Fong Ling's phone suddenly rang. She glanced at the number on the screen and picked it up. "Grandma, Fong Ling, where are you now?" For some reason, Grandmother Feng's voice seemed to be very low on the other end of the phone. She spoke carefully. Fong Ling instantly sensed that something was wrong. She immediately slowed down and focused on the voice on the other end of the phone. "I'm on my way back to the Fong family." "What happened?" Grandmother Fong whispered nervously. "The old helper and I brought little Momo out to play. We had just arrived near the amusement park when we felt a car following us. Now that we've entered the amusement park, I do feel 2 people following us after getting out of the car." Fong Ling quickly searched the car for the nearest amusement park to the Fong family. She drove into the fork, turned the car around, and continued driving in another direction. She sped up and held her phone in her other hand. Her voice was calm and steady. "Do you know who the other party is coming for? The old helper and I are 2 terrible old ladies. How could we be followed? They should be coming for the child." Hearing that Fong Ling's voice was calm, Grandmother Fong, who was originally a little afraid and nervous, suddenly quietened down. She said softly, I'm afraid that I don't have any abilities. If those people come to snatch the child, the two of us might not be able to protect him. I'll be right there. Feng Ling saw that the navigation showed that they were about 5 kilometers away from the amusement park. 10 minutes. Find a place with many people and wait for me. Don't look back. Don't let them notice anything. Just pretend that you don't know anything. All right, then be careful. What if these people are not to be trifled with? Don't worry, I'm not to be trifled with. With that, Feng Ling hung up the phone expressionlessly. She increased the speed of the car and rushed toward the direction shown by the navigation like an arrow released from the bow. When they arrived at the amusement park, it had only been 10 minutes. Feng Ling parked the car and looked down at her phone. There was still a message from her grandmother a minute ago, saying that the child was still by their side and was safe. She then sent another message saying that they were under a white castle and there were many people there. Chapter 14:19. As expected, old Madame Feng and the old servant pulled little Momo to the place with the most people. The two of them squatted down from time to time to tease the child and did not look around to show any nervousness. Thankfully, they cooperated well. Feng Ling walked over with relief. When she passed by them, she did not stop but slowed down her footsteps. As though she was passing by a stranger, she whispered, "Follow me to the Ferris wheel. Pretend not to know me. The two people following me shouldn't be very professional and don't know me." Hearing her words, old Madame Feng and the old servant did not reply. They followed Feng Ling's request and walked over. Feng Ling kept a distance from them, but her eyes were focused on them. When old Madame Feng brought little Momo onto the Ferris wheel began to move as the number of people gradually increased. The one they were sitting in gradually rose into the air. At this moment, she turned to the other side as though she was just an ordinary tourist passing by. She did not stop at all. All of a sudden, she bent down and tied the shoelaces of her white sneakers. From the corner of her eye, she saw a tall and burly man wearing a black hat staring at the rising room on the Ferris wheel. It was the room little Momo was in. At the same time, Feng Ling glanced at a tall and thin man beside him. He was dressed similarly, but the man was holding a baseball bat from somewhere. In such an amusement park, a baseball bat was not strange. He tapped his palm back and forth and stared in the direction of the Ferris wheel, seemingly a little impatient. Feng Ling stood up again. At this moment, her phone rang. She picked it up and Li Nanheng's voice came from the phone. "Where?" "The nearest amusement park to the Feng family's villa is near Odin Street," Feng Ling said softly into the phone. The man, who was nibbling on a banana in the apartment, heard her calmly report the location and his expression immediately turned solemn. "What happened?" "Little Momo is being followed. It's not convenient for me to say more. I'll hang up first." Feng Ling quickly hung up the phone. When she turned back, she suddenly saw that one of the men had turned his face in her direction. He seemed to have recognized her and was suspicious of her. After all, the people who came here were either couples or children. She had been alone from beginning to end. Feng Ling's gaze met his again through the crowd. She seemed to understand something at the same time. In the next second, Feng Ling chose to move away from the Ferris wheel area. She abruptly turned and deliberately ran toward a clear lake in the middle of the amusement park. The two men subconsciously raised their feet and chased after her. Clearly, they were afraid that she would go to the police or ruin their business and wanted to subdue her first. At the same time, in Feng Ling's private apartment in New York. Li Nanheng glanced at the sky outside, put on the black t-shirt that he had called the mall to deliver, picked up the electronic car key, and walked out. As soon as he arrived outside, he saw Qin Shuk walking out of the elevator with a basket of fruits. He bumped into her head-on. Qin Shuk was shocked and glared at him. "Li, cousin-in-law, where are you going?" Li Nanheng glanced at her and then at the open door. "You came at the right time. Look after the house. I'm going out for a while. Qin shook. What the hell? She had just sneaked over to comfort her dear little cousin and to see how Li Nanheng's eyes were. Why did he ask her to stay behind to look after the house when she had just arrived? Can't this door be locked? Why should I look at the house? I don't know the password. What if I come back immediately and can't enter the door? Li Nanheng answered indifferently. He had already taken a step forward and entered the elevator. Qin shook, she didn't understand. However, seeing that the elevator door was closed and Li Nanheng's cold and serious expression was cut off, she hesitated for a moment. Although she was unwilling, she still moved to the door and walked in. Looking at the apartment that was filled with Li Nanheng and Feng Ling's aura, she let out a long sigh. Feng Ling's phone could not be reached. Grandmother Feng and the old helper had already started their second lap on the Ferris wheel with the child. They were very obedient to Feng Ling and did not go down. However, after so long, they did not receive Feng Ling's call. They could only call her, but they could not get through. The old lady looked out of the window of the Ferris wheel. Now that their position had risen again, they could see far away, but she could not see Feng Ling among so many people. Grandmother Feng frowned worriedly and called her again. This time, the call connected. However, after ringing for a long time, it was finally picked up. Hello. How is it? Have you shaken off those people who are following you? No, they're still following me. I've led them to the east side of the amusement park, but I saw that there should be someone in the car parked outside. Don't go down yet, and don't leave alone. Wait for my news. What? There's actually someone else? Grandmother Feng was taken aback. What are these people doing? This is just a child. The child's parents aren't by his side. How can he be followed? Feng Ling did not answer immediately. Not knowing what had happened, she hung up. After the Wen family's accident, no one knew what had happened inside and outside. The rich businessman that Wen Liqing later married also had a problem. Feng Ling did not know what these people wanted from little Momo, but at least if these people really took the child away, little Momo would definitely be scared out of his wits. Such a young child could not be easily taken away and used. Feng Ling put her phone back into her pocket and looked forward. On the east side of the amusement park, there was a row of tall walls. Inside the walls, there was a row of stained glass with various children's drawings. The glass reflected the figures of the two men who were chasing after her. They were following so closely. It seemed like they recognized her. Did these people not know where she used to be? Did they not know enough about the Feng family's internal affairs? Or were they confident enough to defeat her and plan to make a move? In front of her was the end. There was a crowd, and behind her was a lake that she had just bypassed. Feng Ling looked at the direction in front of her and glanced at it. She quickly walked into the cobblestone path. Her footsteps were fast but smooth, making it difficult for the two tall and strong men to chase after her. Feng Ling did not stop at all. She walked into the small forest in the depths of the cobblestone path. At the same time, she untied the clothes around her waist and put them back on. As she walked, she gently moved her wrists and continued forward with a burning gaze. Chapter 14:20. The small forest at the east end of the amusement park was not big. There were high walls in front and on the right. If she walked forward, she would reach a very hidden corner. Feng Ling's expression did not change. Hearing the footsteps behind her, she immediately scanned all the nearby trees. There were no amusement facilities here, and few people would come here. She engraved the height and position of all the trees, as well as the location of the slightly taller grass in front of her into her mind in a second, automatically analyzing it into the best map for escaping in the wilderness and capturing the enemy. The footsteps of the two men behind her suddenly slowed down. They seemed to be observing the surroundings and realized that there was no way out, but Feng Ling still walked forward without hesitation. At the same time, Feng Ling had already circled around a thick tree in front of her and quickly disappeared from their sight. From their point of view, at first, they wanted to deal with this woman who was a hindrance, and then take the child away. But now, they felt that something was wrong. However, they had chased her all the way here, and there was no way forward. She was just a woman. What else could they do? At this moment, the tall and strong man picked up his phone and called his accomplice in the car outside. He whispered something, and the tall and thin man with the baseball bat continued to follow. As this place was relatively close to the lake area in the amusement park and no one came to clean it all year round, the high wall at the end of the small forest was covered with moss. When the wind blew, the lush smell of the forest brushed the tip of her nose. Feng Ling accurately found the place with the most moss on the wall and the cleaner place. She rushed forward, raised her hand, and pressed the wall. She nimbly stepped up and jumped up the high wall. A few seconds later, the two people who caught up also sped up, but because they were in too much of a hurry, they didn't notice that there was so much moss on the wall. Suddenly, a muffled scream came from the ground. The tall and thin man, who was about to climb up with a baseball bat with one hand, fell from the wall and lay on the ground with his limbs spread wide open. Then, the baseball bat in his hand suddenly flew up and smashed into his face, causing him to see stars and couldn't recover for a few seconds. The other person had just made a call and hurried forward to help him up. The tall and thin man stood up with a grimace. He turned around and spat a mouthful of blood on the ground. *CK, the baseball bat hit his own mouth. His gums were about to split. This woman has some skills. She can climb up such a high wall just like that. Are we still chasing? Chase. That child, ask them to come and take the child away. We can't let this woman go. Continue to chase after her. The two of them hurriedly climbed up the high wall and searched for the figure that had disappeared. At this moment, Feng Ling suddenly revealed a corner of her clothes less than 100 meters away from here. The two men on the wall saw it and quickly jumped down to chase after her. The tall and strong man picked up the phone that was ringing as he ran. On the other side of the phone, the middle-aged man's cold voice sounded. Get rid of that woman. Don't let her get in the way. The two of them no longer hesitated. They pulled out two Ying's short knives from their waists and rushed over. Feng Ling walked in front. Outside the high wall was a closed high-rise residential area. There were about dozens of buildings in the residential area. She circled around the landscaped garden behind the residential area and headed straight for the door of a tall building that had just been opened by a person. She grabbed the door in time before it closed and quickly walked in. She did not follow the person to the elevator but turned around and ran up the escalator. Just as she had expected, the moment she ran up to the third floor, the door downstairs had already opened. The moment the two people rushed in, they were not stupid. One chose to wait for the elevator, while the other directly climbed up the stairs. The two of them wanted to pincer attack, one from the top and the other from the bottom. At this time, Feng Ling was no longer running. She stood at the safety door on the third floor and casually closed the door to avoid disturbing the people living on this floor. She heard the man's footsteps getting closer and closer in the corridor. At the same time, she heard that another elevator had already arrived on the first floor. Feng Ling stopped at the corner between the third and fourth floors. At this moment, the man had already rushed up. The moment he saw her, he reached into his pocket, held the knife that he had already prepared, and rushed up to her. However, the moment the other party ran up with great difficulty, Feng Ling pressed one hand on the handrail of the stairs and easily flipped over, jumping back to the corner between the second and third floors. The moment she landed, she looked up at the person who had just run up and gave him a provocative cold smile. At the same time, she raised her hand and made a "he's very weak" gesture to stimulate the other party's emotions. When the other party cursed with a livid face and also wanted to jump down, Feng Ling only took a slight step back to avoid being hit. However, the second before the other party landed, she raised her leg and swept it forward, successfully tripping the other party. Then, She locked one of his arms behind his back. She twisted her hand and snatched the knife from his hand. She raised her leg and kicked the back of his knee. The tall and strong man, who was probably twice as heavy as her, cried out in pain and knelt to the ground. At this moment, another tall and skinny man who had already taken the elevator upstairs quickly came down from the 6th or 7th floor with a baseball bat in his hand. When he heard his partner's screams, he quickened his pace and rushed to this floor in a few steps. The moment her gaze met Feng Ling's, Feng Ling kicked the man's wrist away. As he staggered to his feet, she quickly picked up the knife on the ground. As usual, she pressed it against the staircase railing, easily flipped and jumped. She had already landed at the junction of the 1st and 2nd floors. She then turned and rushed out. After opening the door and rushing out, Feng Ling first circled to the back of the building and glanced at the nearest building. At the same time, she saw 2 large trucks by the side that should be used for moving. Generally, cars were rarely allowed to enter this kind of enclosed community unless it was for moving. According to normal thinking, it would be more suitable to hide behind another building, but she didn't want to hide, so she went to the back of one of the cars. Taking advantage of the fact that there was no one beside the car, she climbed up and jumped into the car with a lot of furniture. She then squeezed into the wardrobe and refrigerator box. Her phone quietly lit up in her pocket. Earlier, she had already turned it to silent. She looked down and saw that it was a call from Li Nanheng. It was not convenient for her to answer it now, so she did not take out her phone. Chapter 14:21. At this moment, a few people came over from the side of the train and were moving things out. These people were all local Americans. Most of them were workers and the bosses of the moving company. Feng Ling listened to them arrange which things to move first. After confirming that they did not intend to move the largest wardrobe and refrigerator, she squatted there and did not move. At the same time, the 2 stalkers had already caught up with them. When they saw the 2 trucks and the few people beside them, and then saw the things they were moving out, they immediately walked over and circled around the back of the truck. After confirming that there was nothing in the truck, they turned around and went straight to the building in front of them to chase after them. When the workers beside the truck left with the things, Feng Ling leaned inside and listened for a while before getting up and going out. Just as she jumped out of the carriage, she suddenly bumped into someone. Her entire face almost bumped into his arms. Feng Ling staggered half a step and instinctively raised her hand. Before she could recover from the pain in her nose, she heard the man's voice. "You're not answering the phone?" Feng Ling looked up and saw that Li Nanheng was standing in front of her. His cold brows were slightly raised. Her expression instantly relaxed. "I was hiding from someone earlier. I was afraid that I would make a sound, so I didn't answer. The phone is silent in my pocket." At this moment, the 2 people who had just bypassed the building seemed to have sensed that something was wrong. They suddenly turned back and happened to see the man standing with Feng Ling. The moment they saw Li Nanheng, the 2 of them exchanged puzzled looks as though they were considering if they should go over. "Didn't you say you were going back to the Feng family? Why did you come out alone in broad daylight?" Li Nanheng had a smile on his face that the 2 people standing far away could not understand. They could not hear what he was saying, but they were certain that he and Feng Ling knew each other. "How did you come here? Have you gone to see little Momo?" Feng Ling leaned toward the back of the truck and asked softly. "When I passed by the Ferris wheel, I saw your old madam with her servants and children. I've already arranged for them to be in the security room of the amusement park. I called someone to guard them. Don't worry." With the experience of fighting together many years ago, she could immediately understand each other's thoughts with just a glance and a word. Just now, she was indeed trying to buy time for the old man and the child to be rescued, and she also knew that Li Nanheng would definitely come after the previous call. Feng Ling was relieved and didn't ask any more questions. She turned to look at the 2 men and said lightly, "It's good that you've successfully moved them away. There's no need to continue walking the dog. You can start killing." Li Nanheng glanced at her, and Feng Ling also turned to look at him. They looked at each other tacitly. When she looked up, she saw the black light in the corner of the man's eyes. She knew that the man's eyes were really gradually recovering. It wouldn't affect anything even if he came out alone. The two of them were very close, so close that her hand was almost pressed against the man's muscular forearm. Li Nanheng, who had almost recovered to his previous state, was standing beside her. They were just two stalkers. What was there to hesitate about? Feng Ling turned to look in that direction. Not far away, the man holding the baseball bat received Feng Ling's gaze and immediately sized up Li Nanheng warily. He clenched the baseball bat in his hand and did not dare to act rashly. How? Do you want a fat one or a thin one? The smile on Li Nanheng's face became even more obvious, as though he was discussing whether the two of them wanted to eat spicy or not. I say, do you dare to bring me along when you return to the Feng family next time? I have to find an opportunity to curry favor with the old madam and the old master. You have to create an opportunity for me, right? Feng Ling, I think old Madam Feng was quite frightened earlier. I'll drive you back later and go straight to the Feng family's house. Why don't you stay in the Feng family for a night? Feng Ling, there were quite a lot of people in this neighborhood. They came and went, and it was a bustling and expensive residence. There were people of all nationalities and colors. Everyone was rushing out or rushing back. At this moment, Li Nanheng raised his hand and put it around her shoulder. He smiled and lowered his head to kiss her cheek. Feng Ling was about to dodge, but the man held her firmly. He kissed her cheek again and again, then pressed his lips against her hair until her body was completely in his arms. Facing the two of them, Li Nanheng glanced at the baseball bat in the man's hand more than 10 meters away. What did you bring? His lips were pressed against her ear. At this moment, he was smiling, but his voice was clear and serious. He asked in a tone that only she could hear. There's only one knife. I snatched it from them. Feng Ling remained motionless in his embrace. Li Nanheng hugged her tightly in his arms. At the same time, he seemed to want to leave with her in his arms. He turned around with her. At this moment, Li Nanheng's phone rang in his pocket. He stood on the spot and picked up the phone, exposing his back to the two people who were about to pounce on him at any moment. It's Xiao Su. Li Nanheng hung up the phone and kissed Feng Ling's ear. He asked if he needed to come to New York to pick us up. At this moment, they were standing in the middle of the crowd in the neighborhood. The drivers in the two trucks did not know what had happened. They got out of the car and lit a cigarette. Li Nanheng glanced at them and walked over. Brother, can I borrow a cigarette? For a moment, Feng Ling didn't know if he was addicted to smoking or something. She quickly reached out to pull his hand back and whispered with her brows pressed down, You're not allowed to smoke. You haven't smoked in the past few months. If you quit, then quit. Why are you still smoking? Li Nanheng lowered his head to look at her and smiled. If you say that you want me to quit smoking and drinking in order to have a healthy child, I promise that from now on, I'll wear a mask when I go out. I won't even smell secondhand smoke. In the end, you ran out to walk the dog alone. You don't have the self-awareness of being a mother at any time. Can't you stop? Feng Ling. I'm doing this for little Momo's safety. I don't want to fight and kill every day. Li Nanheng lowered his head to look at her. Feng Ling held his strong arm with one hand and placed the other in her pocket, holding the knife. The two dogs behind saw that the two of them really looked like a couple. First, they kissed and hugged each other. Then, they seemed to have said something to each other, and their expressions became much more restrained. In fact, on the phone earlier, Xiao Su, who already knew about the situation in New York, asked, Boss, do you need reinforcements? Li Nanheng answered, Send someone to send old Madam Feng and the child back to the Feng family safely. Don't you need reinforcements? Li Nanheng did not answer. He hung up the phone because the two dogs approached. Chapter 1422. As he spoke, Li Nanheng cast his gaze into the distance as if he had really quarreled with Feng Ling. The tall and thin man with the baseball bat couldn't hold it in any longer. Taking advantage of the few people walking back and forth near them, he approached in that direction again. Feng Ling faced Li Nanheng with her back to the two people behind her. She read the message from Li Nanheng's firm and good-looking chin and seemingly unmoved facial expression. They were coming. Just as Li Nanheng turned back to the driver and said with a smile that he wanted to borrow a cigarette, the tall and thin man had already swung the baseball bat at Feng Ling's back. The truck driver didn't realize what was going on. The lighter in his hand was suddenly snatched away by Li Nanheng, and then the lighter was thrown forward, rubbing against the baseball bat. With a bang sound, he held Feng Ling in his arms and pulled her into his arms. Before the man could react from the explosion, he turned around to the back of the truck and quickly took out the knife from Feng Ling's pocket. Next time you encounter such a thing, remember to inform me immediately. If I didn't call you, were you going to settle it outside before going back? Li Nanheng pressed Feng Ling firmly against the back of the truck, not letting her rush out. If you want to beat someone up, just do it. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Feng Ling glared at him and was about to rush over to finish him off. However, as soon as she moved, she was quickly pressed back by the door of the truck. In the blink of an eye, she was in a stalemate with the man for half a second and understood what he meant. She had left the base for so long. He didn't want her to expose her skills in front of outsiders. It would be easy for her to be targeted. She slowly put down her hand, feeling somewhat helpless, and could only raise her chin in that direction. All right, you go. Li Nanheng smiled in satisfaction and touched her head. Stand here and don't move. With that, the man turned around and walked around the side of the truck. Then there was a collision sound. Without looking, she knew that the baseball bat had been successfully snatched by Li Nanheng. With his skills, those two pieces of trash were like mantises trying to stop a car. Originally, she wanted to tell Li Nanheng the situation over the phone, hoping that he would send someone to take the child away as soon as possible, but since he had come personally, there was no need for her to go out. Feng Ling called old Madame Feng again and confirmed that she was indeed in Li Nanheng's car. Only then did she relax. At the same time, she heard the truck driver's exclamation. She hung up the phone and walked out of the car. She saw that the tall and strong man who had just pounced over was almost sent flying by Li Nanheng's kick. With a loud bang, he crashed heavily into a flower bed in the neighborhood. The two of them were shocked and furious. After all, they didn't know the situation of the Feng family and the people around Feng Ling originally. They only wanted to deal with that woman, but they didn't expect such a powerful character to appear halfway. Moreover, that woman clearly had some skills. She didn't even need her help. Who are you? The tall and thin man asked with a cold expression. Li Nanheng did not answer. He raised his leg and flew up. Before the man could react, he let out a cry of pain and swept him to the ground. At the same time, he reached into his pocket but hesitated. It was not suitable to use a knife or a gun in a crowded place. In the end, he punched the man's head that had just been raised back to the ground, making a muffled sound. The other party's nose instantly bled. He fell to the ground in pain and covered his face. In the next moment, another person suddenly shouted and pounced over. Li Nanheng quickly dodged and hit him with his elbow. Feng Ling took a look and ignored them. Hearing that it was almost a physical fight, she called the Feng family. After explaining the situation, she put down the phone and turned back to see that the two people had fallen to the ground and could not get up. The sound of police cars was approaching. Li Nanheng glanced at Feng Ling leisurely and then turned back to look at the driver who was standing by the truck and slowly applauding in surprise. You called the police? The driver nodded and looked at Li Nanheng with admiration. Li Nanheng snorted and ignored the two people on the ground. It was good to call the police. It saved them the trouble of solving it themselves. Although they were just small characters, it involved the one family. The matter was dirty and troublesome. He walked back to the back of the car and saw that Fong Ling was standing there waiting for him. She had never been good at hiding behind others, but today, she was quite obedient. She knew that she was carrying the Fong family's reputation and safety on her shoulders and could not cause trouble in public. The two of them were only a meter apart until Li Nanheng said, "Go back to the Fong family?" Or, "Go back to the Fong family." Fong Ling saw that the man was not even panting. It could be seen how useless those two were. On the way back. "You actually slipped away for so long with just these two trash. Don't you know how precious your time is? I wanted to send them away. After all, the elderly and children are in the amusement park. I didn't want to attract the attention of their accomplices. I wanted to lure them away, but you suddenly arrived." Fong Ling paused and said, "How precious is my time? I don't have a job right now. I'm so idle that I'm about to grow hair. How is it precious? Every minute and second of your time belongs to me. If you're free, you should stay at home and love me." Love each other? It was more like loving and killing each other in bed. Her life was almost gone because of him. Couldn't he let her run out to take a breather? Fong Ling ignored him. Li Nanheng leaned over and took a bite of her face. Fong Ling was speechless. "When we return to the Fong family, restrain yourself. Don't scare the elderly." "How?" "Don't kiss you in front of them. Don't be too enthusiastic. You're not a very enthusiastic person." "That depends on who I'm talking to. When have I not been enthusiastic about you and the people and things related to you?" Fong Ling couldn't refute. After thinking for a long time, it seemed that Li Nanheng would always have a different side in front of her and in front of others. Seeing that she didn't speak, Li Nanheng snorted as he drove. "All the fire on my body has been ignited on you." Fong Ling was embarrassed. "Focus on driving. Your eyes have just recovered, but you insist on driving. My safety is in your hands now. Even if I didn't get into trouble in the hands of those two stalkers, I'm afraid I'll die under your steering wheel. Watch the road. Don't keep looking at me." Even if Li Nanheng turned his head, the corner of his eyes did not leave the road ahead. He smiled and stopped at the pharmacy by the roadside for 2 minutes. When he returned, he threw her a box of Band-Aids. Fong Ling took it and glanced at it. Then she lowered her head and noticed that there was a small cut on her wrist. She had probably scratched a branch when she was running in the woods. It was not serious. It was a very small piece, but she still took it and stuck it on herself. Chapter 14:23. The Fong Family. Little Momo had no idea what had happened in the past few hours. After returning home, he drank some water and was brought to wash his hands by the helper. Then he was carried back to his room to sleep. When Grandfather Fong heard about the situation, his heart was in turmoil. He was worried that something would happen to the child in the Fong family. When Fong Ling and Li Nanheng returned and saw them enter the door, Grandfather Fong quickly said, "Can't you contact Wen Liqing? Right now, the so-called uncle of the Wen family is staring at the child. He must have some ulterior motive. We don't know the situation at all. If we leave the child here, something will happen sooner or later." "I know. If it really doesn't work, I'll bring the child to Los Angeles or put him in 11 base. After all, Wen Liqing and Dr. Wen used to be related to 11 base. Those brothers will definitely take good care of little Momo. There's no safer place than there." Before Grandfather Fong could speak, Grandmother Feng's eyes reddened. "It's indeed safe to send him there, but they're all men. How can they take care of the child?" From her words, she knew that the old lady couldn't bear to part with the child. Even if he wasn't her great-grandson, she had personally taken care of him for so long. There's nothing wrong with a boy going to the base when he's young. I'll tell Ah Fong to be gentle to the child. After all, Momo is indeed too young. Li Nanheng spoke up at the right time. We're all in Los Angeles. We'll take better care of the child. Grandmother Fong nodded and sighed. All right. Although I can't bear to, I was really scared today. If it weren't for you and Fong Ling, I don't know what would have happened. This child is so young. What if, then it's settled. Send him to the base in Los Angeles. We'll talk about the rest after we can contact the child's parents. Or, we can go back to Los Angeles to live, Grandfather Fong suddenly suggested. Fong Ling hadn't had the time to discuss this with them. She didn't expect the elder to take the initiative to return to Los Angeles. Fong Ling raised her eyes and turned to look at Li Nanheng. She saw a smile in Li Nanheng's eyes and was clearly very satisfied with the elder's suggestion. If the two elders of the Fong family also decided to return to Los Angeles with Fong Ling, the Fong and Li families would be able to contact each other often, and the elders would be able to hang out often. It would be very beneficial to their future love life. Grandmother Fong didn't seem to have thought of this. She was stunned for a moment before saying, if we return to Los Angeles, shook. The headquarters of the Fong Corporation is now in New York. Since Shook has taken over, let her stay in New York to develop at such a young age. In the future, if Fong Ling isn't busy, she can come back to help her occasionally. In addition, Shook's parents and family are also in Los Angeles. She will go back during the holidays. There's no problem. After speaking, Grandfather Fong turned his attention to Li Nanheng, who had been standing with Fong Ling since he entered the door. He looked at him seriously for a while and asked, "How have you been recently? Are your eyes healed?" Li Nanheng curved his lips and smiled politely at Grandfather Fong. "All right, thank you for your concern, Elder Fong." Looking at Li Nanheng, who was standing by Fong Ling's side, Elder Fong couldn't help but recall when the Fong family wanted Fong Mingzhu to marry him. At that time, Li Nanheng was definitely not as easy to talk to as he was now. Especially when it came to Fong Mingzhu, Li Nanheng had never been merciful or polite. At that time, when he arrived at the Fong family, it was as though there was something separating him from the Fong family. Just a faint glance from him made him shudder. But now that he had returned to the Fong family with Fong Ling, his brows were much gentler. He was no longer the arrogant Li Nanheng. Grandfather Fong nodded and smiled. "It's good that you're fine. You and Fong Ling have come together step by step for so many years. Although her grandmother and I haven't witnessed much, we know that you're unyielding. You can distinguish between liking and disliking you two clearly." The elder did not directly point it out, but he vaguely mentioned Li Nanheng's lukewarm attitude toward the Fong family. The smile on Li Nanheng's lips did not fade. His tone was very light. The difference between people is too obvious. Of course, you should distinguish between liking and disliking. Fong Ling raised her brows and glanced at him. Li Nanheng did not look at her, but it did not mean that he did not receive her gaze. His words were full of meaning. Grandfather Fong understood. Although both of them were his granddaughters, Fong Mingzhu had done too much wrong. If she had only made a mistake because of her personality, as a family, they would have tolerated and forgiven her. However, she was so wrong that even her parents had died. After being controlled by the police for so many years, the two of them had never visited her. However, she was still a granddaughter, and it was inevitable that their hearts would be hurt. Thankfully, Fong Ling was outstanding enough. Although Bai Gu was a little indifferent and didn't know how to act coquettishly in front of the elders, she was a child that they could rest assured about. In the past few years, the two of them had felt much better. Grandma Fong didn't want to think about those things anymore. She stood up and said, "We can go back to Los Angeles, but we can't enter the base. We don't know what happened to little Momo inside. The base is officially controlled. It's true that we can't casually enter. Even Ah Fong can't let us in," Fong Ling said. "But we can pick up the child every week and let you accompany him for a day and a half. After that, we can send him back. There will always be someone watching him. Is that okay?" "All right, all right, all right. That's fine." We can guarantee the child's safety and let us see him occasionally. That's fine. The old lady smiled. The matter was settled, and Fong Ling's heart was finally at ease. She was originally worried that the two elders would be sad and frightened. She and Li Nanheng stayed at the Fong family's home for dinner. That night, Fong Ling planned to return to the condo to stay, but the two elders mentioned that they were preparing to move back to Los Angeles in the next few days. There were still many things to discuss with them, so she stayed at the Fong family's home. The Fong family's residence in New York was also a villa. There were many guest rooms. There were few people in the family, and there were many empty rooms. Li Nanheng could stay in any one of them for a night. Originally, Fong Ling thought that he would restrain himself on account that this was the Fong family. Who knew that when she came out of her room after taking a shower, she saw the man sitting on her bed. She turned to look at the closed bedroom door and then at the man sitting by the bed calmly. How did you come in? I'm right next door. The balcony is close. The man raised his chin toward the balcony outside the window and raised his brows. Chapter 1424. Fong Ling. You really don't change. Li Nanheng was unmoved by her mockery. He watched as she came out wrapped in a towel after showering. If I had known that you would be like this after showering, would have jumped over every day to watch you at the base. Fong Ling's expression faltered. She recalled that he lived next door to her in the base. At that time, the balcony outside was very close, and he could come over at any time. However, he, Boss Lee, was very prideful. Almost every time, he knocked on the door openly and used all kinds of tricks. He didn't even let her off when she was a man. She did not speak and turned to pick up the hairdryer. Before she could dry her hair completely, she suddenly heard her phone ring. She walked out and picked up the phone to see that it was Qin Shuk. She picked it up. Shuk. A resentful voice came from the other end. When are you coming back? Fong Ling's face was filled with confusion. Where are you going? Back to your apartment in New York. Brother-in-law has arranged for me to wait here for a day. It's already so late, but you still haven't come back. I'm about to die of boredom, okay? Qin Shuk said as she nibbled on the hamburger in her hand. Thankfully, there are a few restaurants near your house that can deliver takeout. I asked for something to eat. Otherwise, when you come back, you'll see me starving to death here. Fong Ling turned to look at Li Nanheng, who had clearly forgotten about Qin Shuk. You're at my place? I'm going back to the Fong family. I don't think I can go back tonight. Why don't you call a car to pick you up now? After a few seconds of silence, an angry voice suddenly came. F***CK. Where's Li Nanheng? Is he on your side? He's here. Ah, this bastard. He said he didn't know the password to your apartment and was afraid that he wouldn't be able to enter when he went back. He asked me to stay and watch the house. I've been guarding your place for so long, but the two of you went back to the Fong family freely, leaving me here alone to eat hamburgers. You're too much. Fong Ling coughed and lowered her voice to say, I encountered something outside today, so, I don't care. I don't want to listen to your explanation. Anyway, Li Nanheng offended me. I won't call him my cousin-in-law anymore. Qin Shuk hung up the phone angrily. Thinking about it, she still felt unhappy. Before she left, she saw the pair of men's slippers on the ground and stomped on them a few times before rushing out of the door. Fong Ling heard that the call had been hung up, put down the phone, and turned to look at Li Nanheng, who was sitting by the bed as though nothing had happened. You left Qin Shuk at home and left. You didn't even call her afterward to ask her to go home? Li Nanheng glanced at her, his attitude sincere and serious, without the slightest hint of remorse. Oh, she's still here? I don't have her number. Fong Ling, she was so angry that her temples were throbbing. This man was always irresponsible and unreliable to others. Fong Ling knew that Qin Shuk was probably angry right now. Based on her understanding of her, it would be at least 48 hours before she wanted to talk to them again. She lowered her head and held her phone, seriously sending a message to Chin Shuk to apologize. As she was sending the message, she suddenly felt a warm breeze on her hair that had not been completely dried. She turned her head and saw that Lee Nanhung had gone to the bathroom to take out the hairdryer and was drying her hair. She glanced back at him. It's useless to coax me now. Chin Shuk is angry. What did she say? Lee Nanhung didn't think much of it. He gently lifted her hair with his hand. He had never done such a thing before and didn't know how to blow it, but he still tried his best to keep the hairdryer at a certain distance from her hair and slowly blew it. She said she will never call you cousin-in-law again. Oh, she can call me whatever she wants. Anyway, the position of cousin-in-law belongs to me. Fong Ling didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After sending the message, she turned around and snatched the hairdryer back. I'll blow it myself. Go back to the guest room to sleep. Lee Nanhung had no intention of leaving. The guest room is too cold. It's summer now. Oh, then it's too hot. There's no air conditioning. How can there be no air conditioning? I sat on your bed for a while. It's quite soft. I should be able to sleep as soon as I touch the bed. I promise I'll only hug you to sleep. I definitely won't do anything to you in the Fong family, the man said confidently. It would be strange if she believed him. Fong Ling glared at him. You also know that this is the Fong family? My grandparents are already so old. They're not old people who can see through everything. If they find out that you're sleeping here, it's hard to say if they won't be angry. Hurry back to your guest room. I've been tormented by you for 2 to 3 days. Can't you let me sleep alone for a night? Knock, knock. At this moment, there was a sudden knock on the door. Fong Ling paused and glared at Lee Nanhung, indicating for him to quickly jump back from where he came from and tell him to quickly go next door. However, the man only took the hairdryer from her hand and turned to take it back to the bathroom. He had no intention of hiding at all. Fong Ling wanted to scold him, but the man had already gone to the bathroom. She couldn't call him now, or he would definitely hear her outside. She could only walk to the door and open it halfway. She saw the old lady standing outside. Grandma? When are you and Nanhung leaving for Los Angeles? The old lady saw that the door was only half open. Even though she couldn't see anything, she didn't push the door open. Instead, she stood outside the door and asked with a smile. In the next 2 days. This time, I came back to New York mainly to treat his eyes. I also accompanied Shu Ku to attend a dinner party set up by a few partners who helped the Fong Corporation. The itinerary is almost over. Seeing that she had no intention of coming in, Fong Ling released her hand from the door. Her previous reservations were gone. Then let's go back together. Your grandfather, your family's servants, and I will take a car alone. When we return to Los Angeles, the Fong family's relatives will come over to help pack up. You two don't have to trouble yourselves. Live well together. Besides, Nanhung isn't young anymore. It's time for you two to have an ending. Fong Ling looked at the old lady and nodded. I know. Chapter 1425. After chatting for a while, Grandmother Fong said that it was too late and wanted to return to her room to rest. When she went downstairs, a servant came up and brought the medicinal soup that had just been cooked. Old madam, this is for Mr. Lee. Didn't he get injured some time ago? It's good for his health to drink more medicinal soup. Shall I send it up for him now? Grandmother Fong recalled that Fong Ling had only opened the door once and looked a little cautious. She smiled lightly and said, there's no need to send him off. It's already so late. It's hard to digest so much soup. Put it in the pot and let him drink it at breakfast tomorrow. The servant was stunned for a moment. When she saw the old lady's understanding expression, she immediately understood and smiled. All right, I'll put it back first. In the room, Feng Ling's eyes were a little red because of what her grandmother had said, but it was not obvious. When Li Nanheng walked over and saw her standing in front of the door, he walked over and rubbed her head before pulling her into his arms. I heard what the old lady said. Her heart really aches for you. You should be relieved that you're no longer the little wolf girl who doesn't have a family. You have a family, and your family will love you. Everyone acknowledges your excellence. That's enough. Feng Ling obediently stayed in his arms. After a while, she said, Grandma should know you're here. Then you can sleep here. Li Nanheng raised his brows. Before he could speak, he heard her say, remember what you said earlier. Just sleep. Don't move. He chuckled. A week later. Los Angeles. I didn't expect that although the people in the base are all rough men, they actually like children. Little Momo isn't afraid of strangers. When he knew that we were sending him over, he obediently allowed them to tease him. He didn't cry or make a fuss. Grandmother Feng sat in the car leaving the base with a relieved expression. Momo is young, but she is sensible. I remember that when Liqing was also a very sensible child back then. I just don't know what happened to her in the past few years. Grandfather Feng sighed and then looked back at the base that was getting further and further away. Recently, Li Nanheng's eyes had just recovered. He wanted to drive several times but was rejected by Feng Ling. On the way, Feng Ling drove while Li Nanheng sat in the passenger seat. Hearing the conversation between the two elders, he said mildly, the Wen family isn't clean because of the grudges between the older generation. In all these years, the only ones who can be praised are Wen Liqing and Wen Linhan, the siblings with different personalities. Now that the two of them are missing and someone wants to take little Momo away, it's clear that there are many benefits involved. Sigh, this kind of thing is not rare in rich families. I just pity Momo. Everyone grows up in a different environment. It's all arranged by fate. Boys encounter more things when they're young, and they'll be more responsible when they grow up. Don't think too much about it. Madame Feng patted her shoulder. Look at our Feng Ling. She encountered no less than Momo when she was young. She's so outstanding now. Feng Ling, who was focused on driving, was praised again. She was no longer as uncomfortable as before. Instead, she continued driving calmly and did not answer. Li Nanheng suddenly added, so in the future, our child will definitely be as obedient as her. Feng Ling almost stepped on the accelerator as the brake. Her expression instantly changed from calm to strange. The atmosphere between the two elders of the Feng family suddenly fell silent for a few seconds. Then, they suddenly burst into laughter. Then when do the two of you plan to give birth? That's right, that's right. Can't you tell how much we like children? We can dote on little Momo so much. If you quickly give birth to one, we can help you look after the child in the future. Feng Ling, Li Nanheng nodded. It's not just one. I don't think it's enough to give birth to two. Otherwise, the elders on both sides won't be able to take their turn. Right, then let's give birth to a few more. It's that Jean Wan, right? The Mrs. Mo that Feng Ling often mentions to us. Didn't she just give birth to a boy and a girl? I heard that she's pregnant again recently, right? Feng Ling, Nanheng, you guys have to work harder. Feng Ling, are you sure you want to return to High City before getting married? Li Nanheng glanced at the booked flight time and venue on his phone and hugged Feng Ling, who had just spoken to Jean Wan on the phone, into his arms. Jean Wan is already 2 months pregnant. I should visit her. Feng Ling put her phone aside. Didn't you say that you haven't had a good relationship with me for so many years? I'm respecting your thoughts and decided to find a quiet place to take a walk. There are many familiar people in High City. Compared to America, it's safer in terms of security. It's been a long time since you last met up with Mr. Mo and Dr. Qin. I'll take this opportunity to see Jean Wan. Isn't she vomiting every day? Does she have the energy to see you? I don't need her to accompany me. I'm just going to take a look. It's true that I haven't returned to High City for a long time. Jean Wan said that her pregnancy this time was even worse than the last time she was pregnant with an N and Ning Ning. At that time, the two little babies were very quiet in her stomach and basically didn't torture her. This time, however, she vomited heavily every morning, causing Mr. Mo to be late for work every day. He insisted on watching over her at home until she got over the discomfort of her morning sickness. Only then could he leave the Yew Garden with peace of mind. Although there were Auntie Chen and many people at home to help take care of the children, Anan and Ningning were used to being by their parents' side and always liked to be with them. It was said that every night, Mr. Mo had to lie between the two children and tell them at least 3 stories before they were willing to sleep. Moreover, Ningning always liked to hug her father's thigh to sleep, and Anan liked to hug her mother's stomach to sleep. As time passed, this became a habit. Recently, Jean Wan had just become pregnant and had to take good care of her stomach, so she had to battle wits with the 2 little guys every night. The longer she tossed around before going to bed, the more she vomited the next morning. The doctor said that Jean Wan's reaction in the early stages of pregnancy could not be controlled with medicine, but after the first 3 months, she would improve. Seeing that there was only 1 month left, in order to calm his wife down, Mr. Mo simply sent Anan and Ningning to the Mo family and let the 2 children torment Elder Mo. Elder Mo was very happy. He was willing to tell 10 stories every night. Jean Wan was quiet, but she missed the children every night. During pregnancy, she was easily agitated and would occasionally cry, which scared Mr. Mo so much that he moved back to the Mo family with Jean Wan and the servants. In this way, the children would be accompanied by the elder, and Jean Wan could also see the children. Everyone was happy. Fong Ling felt that it was necessary for her to see the 2 cute and clingy little guys and let Li Nanheng experience the atmosphere of being a father in advance. Chapter 1426. High City, Airport. Jean Wan sat on a bench at the exit of the airport, crying with snot and tears. She had been crying for a full 10 minutes. Mo Jingshan coaxed her for a full 10 minutes. In the end, he called Auntie Chen, who had followed him, to buy a cup of sweet milk for her to drink. Jean Wan was still sobbing as she drank the sweet milk. She turned her head away and ignored him. Auntie Chen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Fong Ling and Li Nanheng walked out of the safety gate of the customs passage. When they walked to the exit, they saw this scene. Yo, why did you quarrel at the airport? Li Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket and walked over. Fong Ling saw that Jean Wan was crying and thought that something had happened. After all, the Jean Wan she knew was not a person who liked to cry. Even if she was really unhappy, she was a person who could endure it. Why did she sit here and cry? What's wrong? What happened? Fong Ling leaned forward and saw that Jean Wan's eyes were still red. Jean Wan took a look at her and sniffled. It seemed that she had cried too much and couldn't speak for a while. Mo Jingshan, who was sitting by the side, took a look at Li Nanheng. How do your eyes feel recently? Li Nanheng curved his lips. Not bad. A few days after the surgery, they were a little blurry. These days, they've recovered a lot. Other than the occasional pain and itchiness when I overuse my eyes, they're no different from before. What did Dr. Yurko say? He said that she still needs external massage for at least 2 months, but now it basically doesn't affect her life. Li Nanheng glanced at Jean Wan as he spoke. Why? Did you make your wife cry? Auntie Chen stood by the side and quickly said, It's because after Mrs. Mo got pregnant this time, I don't know what kind of little ancestor she's pregnant with. Ever since she got pregnant, her emotions and temper have been especially sensitive. I think it's because the morning sickness this time was too severe and caused her to suffer. If she doesn't eat the things she likes to eat, she will want to cry. Just now, Mrs. Mo saw that there was a milk tea shop selling there and said that she wanted to drink milk tea. Mr. Mo thought that milk tea was not good for her in the early stages of pregnancy, so he didn't let her drink it. In the end, Mrs. Mo has been crying ever since. Li Nanheng, Fong Ling. Li Nanheng glanced at Jin Wan, who was still angrily drinking sweet milk and ignoring Mo Jingshan. Is a pregnant woman so scary? Mo Jingshan, on the other hand, was calm. He glanced at him indifferently. When Fong Ling is pregnant, you can feel it yourself. Fong Ling, our Fong Ling doesn't like to cry so much. Besides, it's just a cup of milk tea, so what? There are no real tea leaves in the milk tea outside. Don't mistreat your wife's mouth. Li Nanheng said as he looked around to see if there was a place that sold milk tea. For Jin Wan's sake, he planned to buy a cup for her. After all, this woman's eyes were red when she cried, and she looked really pitiful. Oh, Mr. Li, you haven't become a father yet. You don't understand these things. Mrs. Mo really can't drink these things now. Besides, when a woman is pregnant, she is always very greedy. Recently, she has eaten a lot of junk food because of her gluttony. Mr. Mo is also doing this for his own good. Before Auntie Chen finished speaking, Jin Wan had already burst into tears again. She leaned her head against Fong Ling's arms and cried out in grievance. Mo Jingshan turned back to look at her. Seeing that she had actually gone to find Fong Ling to act coquettishly, he was so helpless that the veins on his forehead bulged. Then he received Li Nanheng's cold and mocking gaze. Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at him. He did not speak, but his gaze was clearly saying, "Don't be anxious. You're almost at this step." Auntie Chen smiled helplessly by the side, as though she had long been used to it. Women are very fragile when they are pregnant. Recently, Mr. Mo didn't allow her to hug Anen and Ning Ning to sleep. As a mother, her psychology must have been affected. It's inevitable that she will be emotional during pregnancy. Mrs. Mo's temper is so good. When she is pregnant, she will occasionally quarrel with Mr. Mo and act coquettishly. It's quite cute. Hearing that Auntie Chen actually said she was cute, Jin Wan cried even louder. I'm already a child's mother. What else can I love? With that, she continued to cry. Fong Ling was a little dazed by Jin Wan's crying. She quickly patted her shoulder. All right, don't cry. If you continue to cry, I don't dare to imagine what it will be like when I am pregnant in the future. You rarely cry in the past. Is pregnancy so uncomfortable? Jin Wan suddenly stopped crying. She raised her head from Fong Ling's arms and looked at her with a pair of red eyes for a while. Then she sniffed and stepped back. She then turned back to take a few tissues from Auntie Chen's hand. After wiping her nose, she looked at Fong Ling with red eyes and then at her stomach. She asked in a nasal tone, "Are you pregnant?" Fong Ling immediately looked a little embarrassed. No. Then she paused and said doubtfully, "I don't think I'm pregnant." During this period of time, she and Li Nanheng had been doing it quite frequently, and they hadn't taken any contraceptive measures. In the past, he had basically been careful every time. Even when they were in the jungle, he respected her wishes and didn't take it in. But now, cough. Fong Ling wasn't sure if she was pregnant. Anyway, she didn't seem to notice any signs of pregnancy. At the very least, she really didn't have any reactions like Jin Wan's vomiting and crying. Jin Wan sobbed again. She looked at Fong Ling's face and muttered, "You're too thin. It's not easy to get pregnant. You have to eat more." Fong Ling chuckled. Weren't you also very thin when you were pregnant? Auntie Chen interrupted. Mrs. Mo has been eating a lot recently, but no matter how much she eats, she doesn't gain weight. Previously, when she was pregnant with Anen and Ning Ning, she was also fed all kinds of delicious and nutritious food by Mr. Mo every day, but she still didn't gain weight. It seems that she only gained 20 pounds during her pregnancy. After giving birth, she already lost weight before she even finished her confinement. Now, it's the same. She eats and drinks every day, but she just can't gain weight. Fong Ling smiled and glanced at Jin Wan again, but Jin Wan began to drink her sweet milk again. As she drank, she turned her head to say to Mo Jingshan, "I still want to drink milk tea. It tastes too sweet." Mo Jingshan's eyes were filled with a patient smile, but his words were serious and cold. "No." Seeing that Jin Wan was about to cry again, Fong Ling quickly sat by Jin Wan's side to talk to her and divert her attention. Chapter 1427. Finally, he coaxed Jin Wan, who had been clamoring for a cup of milk tea, back to the car. Li Nanheng sat in the car and rubbed between his eyebrows, feeling that he had been keeping a distance from women for so many years. Women were really king troublesome. But his Fong Ling should be fine. She didn't have too many women's emotions in her bones. On the way back, Jin Wan still refused to talk to Mo Jingshan. She sat in the back and chatted with Fong Ling. One moment, they talked about Fong Ling in the United States, and the next moment, they talked about An and Ning Ning. When it came to the children, Jin Wan was finally diverted by the brilliance of motherly love. She happily took out her cell phone to show Fong Ling the photos of the children. The two children were almost 3 years old. They were very fair and cute. Anan was a boy and really looked like his father. It could be seen that when he grew up, he would definitely be a handsome boy on the same level as Mr. Mo. Ning Ning looked very much like Jin Wan. She had Jin Wan's cuteness and Mr. Mo's innate cold aura. When she grew up, she would definitely be a cute little beauty with an extremely cold appearance. Fong Ling had seen these photos before. After becoming a mother, Jin Wan was really crazy about showing off the children. She would occasionally send photos of the children to Mo Jingshan. However, there were still many photos she hadn't seen. Fong Ling held her cell phone and looked at them all the way. However, because of Jin Wan's morning sickness, the car was forced to stop about 3 times. Every time, Jin Wan pushed the door open and got out of the car uncomfortably. She ran to the side of the road and bent over to vomit for a long time. Sometimes she spat out some water, and sometimes she just retched. Every time the car stopped, Mr. Mo would personally accompany her to get off the car. He stood by her side, wiped her mouth, handed her water, patted her on the back, and held her in his arms to comfort her. Whenever she was in pain, Mr. Mo would pat her on the back and comfort her in his arms. Whenever Auntie Chen really needed help, Auntie Chen couldn't do anything but continue to sit in the car and stare at the driver. Anyway, they were used to it. Mr. Mo always doted on Mrs. Mo. Although he was going to be a mother for the second time, he still doted on her like a little girl. Jin Wan was treated almost the same as An and Ning Ning. They were the 3 treasures in Mo Jingshan's eyes. Jin Wan, on the other hand, was so uncomfortable that she pushed Mo Jingshan in his arms several times. Mo Jingshan patiently coaxed her. Before returning to the car, he held her in his arms, kissed her sweaty forehead, and said something in her ear. Jin Wan was no longer angry with him. She obediently leaned in his arms and let him pat her back to ease her vomiting so that she wouldn't continue to feel nauseous. After coaxing her back to the car, Mo Jingshan asked the driver to drive and asked Auntie Chen to put a backrest behind Jin Wan so that she could lean more comfortably. After a while, Jin Wan fell asleep leaning against Mo Jingshan. Li Nanheng was very puzzled by this scene. He looked at Fong Ling, who had been sitting calmly in the back with him, and the two of them looked at each other. They had all seen with their own eyes how Jin Wan cooked for the brothers in the base in the Cambodian camp after she was pregnant. She went deep into the enemy's camp to deliver food and water to Mo Jingshan, pretending to be deaf and dumb, and cooperated with those desperados. Step by step, she walked out of the dragon's pool and tiger's den safely with Mo Jingshan. At that time, Jin Wan's temper was not as bad as it was now. So, Auntie Chen's little pregnancy lesson began again in the car. Seeing Jin Wan fall asleep by Mo Jingshan's side, Auntie Chen felt bored sitting in the car, so she began to talk about all kinds of pregnancy knowledge. She also said that every pregnancy of a woman was different because of her physique and various aspects. Many elderly people said that pregnant boys and girls had different reactions during pregnancy. Some had very big reactions, and some didn't feel anything, as if they were not pregnant at all. Auntie Chen also said that Jean Wan was in a bad mood today because she vomited several times on the way to the airport. It was too uncomfortable, so when she arrived at the airport, she asked for a cup of iced milk tea. After being refused, she sat there aggrievedly. Just now, she was vomiting carsick after pregnancy. It was too uncomfortable, and it was normal for her to be sleepy. After hearing Auntie Chen's words, Li Nanheng and Feng Ling chose not to say anything in the car, lest they woke up the little devil next to Mo Jingshan and continued to cry and vomit, making everyone restless. Feng Ling felt a little guilty. If she had known that Jean Wan was so pregnant, she wouldn't have asked her to come to the airport to pick her up. When she heard Jean Wan insist on coming to pick her up on the phone, she didn't refuse. Now it seemed that she really made Jean Wan suffer a lot. When the car arrived in downtown High City, Jean Wan woke up. After sleeping, she felt much better. Because Feng Ling and Mo Jingshan came to High City, she didn't plan to let them stay in a hotel. After waking up, she invited them to stay in the Yu Garden, the Mo family, Yuehu Bay, or Ao Lan International. In short, since they had returned to High City, there was no need for them to stay in a hotel. However, Li Nanheng said indifferently, "No need. It's not like I don't have a place in High City. Back then, when I was in High City in the United States, my men had already bought a residence here. I won't go to your place and disturb your small world of four." Feng Ling didn't speak but said in her heart, "I'm afraid you don't want to be stimulated by Mr. Mo's family of four. After all, other people's children already knew how to play soy sauce." Li Nanheng had been jealous of him several times in the United States. Feng Ling understood him quite well. "No, it's rare for the three of you to come back to High City in recent years. You must go out to drink. How can Feng Ling and I stay in our own homes? You and Qin Sighting can go wherever you want. I'll go to Feng Ling's place tonight," Jean Wan said and looked at Mo Jingshan. "I'll get off the car with them in a while." Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows. Well, he didn't go to the Yu Garden to be the third wheel, but here, there was a crying girl who took the initiative to be his third wheel. Feng Ling didn't refuse. She also turned to look at Mo Jingshan. "Mr. Mo, can I?" Mo Jingshan glanced at Jean Wan. Seeing her expression as if she would run away from home with the child if he didn't agree, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "All right, I don't need to worry about you going to Feng Ling's place, but don't spend the night. When you're done chatting with her tonight, I'll pick you up." Before Jean Wan spoke, Feng Ling felt this was the most appropriate. Since Mr. Mo could agree, Jean Wan didn't need to be rejected. Feng Ling directly agreed. "All right, then it's settled." Jean Wan, Li Nanheng, neither of them spoke. How could it be settled? Auntie Chen sat in the car and silently played with her fingers. She couldn't participate in the conversation between young people. She'd better find a chance to teach them about pregnancy. Chapter 1428. The sky gradually darkened. Sure enough, Li Nanheng and Mo Jingshan directly called Qin Sighting out. After a brief greeting, the three men went out to have fun and drink. Li Nanheng's residence in High City was in a very secluded community in the south of the city. It was located in the southernmost part of a townhouse. The environment was good, the air was good, and there were not many people coming and going. Usually, all kinds of luxury cars could be seen going in and out of the community. No one knew where these big shots came from, but those who could live here were indeed not ordinary. No wonder Li Nanheng always went to High City in the past few years. It turns out that he already has a place to live here. Jean Wan stood on the balcony and looked at the balcony that had just been cleaned. There was no dust or dirt, but because this place had been empty for too long, it was inevitable that there was a long-accumulated smell of dust. She could only open the floor-to-ceiling windows wide and breathe in the night air outside. He probably hasn't lived here for many years. Although it has just been cleaned, your nose is too sensitive now. If you are not used to it, let's go out and find a place to eat. Let's not eat here, Feng Ling said as she walked to the balcony. No, I'm not used to it. It's just that I've been angry with Mo Jingshan recently, so no matter how I look at him these days, I don't like him. Jean Wan sat down on the wooden rocking chair placed on the balcony and then touched her flat lower abdomen. I've only been pregnant for a few days this time, but Mo Jingshan threw Mo Shaoshan to the Mo family. I'm so angry. Feng Ling. Mo Shaoshan? Who? Oh, I'm talking about a cat. We've raised this cat for more than a year. At first, he was quite averse to it. Later, he gradually helped me raise it, but suddenly I got pregnant. Without saying anything, he sent the cat away. Luckily, he only sent him to the Mo family. I can still visit him often. If he dared to send Mo Shaoshan somewhere else, would definitely not live with him anymore. Anyway, she was too familiar with Feng Ling, so she didn't have to care too much about her image. She rocked here and there comfortably, feeling the cool night breeze. She narrowed her eyes and looked at Feng Ling, who was standing by the window on the balcony. She had not been in the base for so many years, but she was still standing quietly and upright. She was delicate and had long hair. From afar, she looked like a beautiful white jade statue. When are you getting married? Jean Wan asked. After all, it was summer in High City. It was a very hot time. Feng Ling also felt that the night breeze was slightly cold, but it was very comfortable. Behind her was the warm yellow light from the window, and outside was the rows of green scenery of the park. Feng Ling glanced at her. The old people on both sides will come out to drink tea and walk birds every day. The only thing they lack is a legal marriage seal. Besides, getting married in America is just registering it. They just need to take some time to register it. They haven't thought about when it will be. Maybe one day, when they have nothing to do, they might just go. Feng Ling glanced at her. You don't have anything to do. Jean Wan continued to lie there and rocked. She nodded. That's good. Your relationship has reached the point where you won't leave him, so there's no need for too many superficial things. Especially you and Li Nanheng, you've also experienced life and death together. It's been so many years. Any day is fine. As long as you can live peacefully in the future, it's fine. With that, Jean Wan glanced at her again. You're not going back to the base? I don't think so. Feng Ling smiled. But I can occasionally go there as the young madam of the Li family. After all, it's the Li family's territory. Seeing the relief in Feng Ling's eyes, Jean Wan smiled. That's fine. You've become the young madam of the Li family from a small soldier in the base. Who is the current person in charge of the base? I don't know much about him. His name is Ah Feng, right? I don't remember where I heard it. Yes, his name is Ah Feng. In the end, he didn't even live as well as you. In contrast, I covet his position as the person in charge of the base more. Feng Ling casually pulled the window behind her to prevent mosquitoes from flying in and said, when I go back one day, I'll discuss with Ah Feng. I'll be the person in charge of the base and give him the position of the young madam of the Li family. Jean Wan was stunned for a moment and didn't know how to react. When she came back to her senses, she found that Feng Ling, who used to be taciturn, was now able to tell corny jokes and especially liked to make fun of Li Nanheng. The two women chatted and laughed on the balcony for a long time, but at 10:00 in the evening, the three men were still chatting outside and had no intention of coming back. The two of them were happy and at ease. The two of them went out to buy food and came back to cook together. They only cooked 2 bowls of noodles and were very satisfied. Because Jean Wan was pregnant, Feng Ling specially bought a lot of fresh fruits and cut them in front of her for her to eat. After Jean Wan was pregnant, her mouth was really busy. Of course, she was very happy to have fruits to eat. They chatted until midnight. It was almost 11 o'clock. Jean Wan leaned against the rocking chair and was about to fall asleep. All of a sudden, Fong Ling hurried out of the bathroom and gently tugged at the blanket on her. Jean Wan opened her eyes and looked at her in a daze. What's the matter? I've been thinking about going back to High City in Los Angeles for the past 2 days and forgot. Today, I found out that my period has been late for almost a week this month. Fong Ling said as she lowered her head to look at Jean Wan, who was still lying on the rocking chair. It's normal for your period to be late for a month, isn't it? Jean Wan suddenly woke up. She looked at her with wide eyes and then picked up her phone to check the time. It's so late. I wondered if there's anyone in the blood test department and the obstetrics and gynecology department in the hospital. Hearing her words, Fong Ling's expression froze. Obstetrics and gynecology department? Then she saw Jean Wan calmly lift the blanket on her, sit up straight in the rocking chair, clear her throat, pick up her phone, and poke the screen a few times. Before Fong Ling could see what she was doing, Jean Wan had already put the phone to her ear. A few seconds later, she said into the phone, "Hey, Li Nanheng, your wife and child are in my hands now. If you don't hand Mo Jingshan back to me as soon as possible, I'll take your fiancé and unborn child to Syria to sell essential oil soap." Fong Ling, on the other side of the phone, Li Nanheng. Ling Li's story should be sweet with the little wolf cubs for a day or two, then it's about to end. I thank everyone for their love on behalf of little Fong Ling and Li Era. After Ling Li's story ends, it will continue with Mr. Qin's story. Ling Li's story is about a passionate collision between a hot-blooded man dressed as a woman, and Mr. Qin's story should be a different style of serious romance. I hope everyone will like it as always. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.